Chapter 264. Seize every moment. How can I not be anxious? Chen Pingping's thin face was expressionless. His smooth, beardless chin made the wrinkles on his face seem even deeper. He looked very old. Remember, I am not much younger than Shaoan. Fan Xian was silent. He could smell some sort of gray aura from the old cripple in front of him. He forced himself to calm down and reported some of the secrets that had occurred on his journey, but he did not reveal that he had talked with Shaoan all night in the cave, and that he already knew the specific location of the temple. When can Sea Lily enter the palace? Chen Pingping seemed to be very confident in controlling that woman from 1,000 miles away. Fan Xian frowned slightly, wondering when he would be able to get in touch with Sea Lily's brother. I'm making arrangements with some people. For the Northern Qi court, this isn't a big deal. It shouldn't be difficult. Chen Pingping nodded. You know, the first bureau's position was originally reserved for Yan Bingyun. I didn't expect Yan Ruohai to want to retire at such a young age. Yan Bingyun has always worked for his father, and is very familiar with the fourth bureau. Staying there is not a bad choice. But the first bureau has been thrown to you. You need to be careful. Fan Xian squinted. Is there anything I need to be careful of? Chen Pingping looked into his eyes with a strange smile. There are many things you need to be careful of. In fact, His Majesty has always hoped that you would pick up the first bureau. After all, there are many officials in the capital. If you don't keep a close eye on them and let them get too close to the princes, there will always be some trouble. Fan Xian's heart trembled. He began to secretly curse that person in the palace. Your sons are making a ruckus. Why do I have to put out the fire? Chen Pingping's withered fingers gently tapped on the armrest of the wheelchair. His knuckles protruded like the joints of bamboo. Fan Xian turned to look and heard the tapping of the armrest. Only then did he realize that the armrest was hollow, just like bamboo. He couldn't help but have a strange thought. This most strict and terrifying old man in the Qin kingdom was as temperamental as bamboo in the wind? You did well in the north this time, Chen Pingping said. You had Wang Qinian stay there. I know what you want to do, but as long as His Majesty doesn't say anything, you can't make a move. Fan Xian frowned and said, The eldest princess made a lot of money from that line. You also know that I will be taking over the palace treasury after the new year. If I do not clean up this mess before I take over, I will not be able to produce result. How can I explain it to the world? Chen Pingping glanced at him and said, The Cui family sells goods to the north on behalf of the eldest princess. If you cut off this line, is there anyone suitable to take over? Fan Xian thought he had something to introduce, so he put on an expression that said he was all ears. Chen Pingping waved his hand. I will report this matter to the Emperor. The Emperor also feels that the eldest princess has stretched her hand too far these past few years. But, after all, we are one family. If he is not willing to relent, then you should not act. You must know that the council also hopes that you can firmly control the palace treasury. First, you are the commissioner. Second, you must know that the reason the Overwatch Council is able to maintain its current position among the 3 departments and 6 departments is inseparable from the palace treasury. Fan Xian asked, What do you mean by that? Chen Pingping glanced at him and slowly explained in a gloomy voice. The Overwatch Council has the power to supervise all officials, so it cannot have any relations with these departments. The affairs of the state and the council have always been separated. The Overwatch Council spends a large amount of money a year, but in all these years, not a single cent has been taken from the national treasury. So, whether it is the Ministry of Revenue or the other departments, they cannot order the council around. This is the so-called independence. Fan Xian understood. The Overwatch Council's funds and salaries are all directly taken from the profits of the palace treasury. Correct. Chen Pingping continued. This was an iron rule set by your mother in order to separate the council from the officials of the world. So, if you want to control the council in the future, you must plan for the thousands of officials in the council and the people on the periphery. The healthier the palace treasury, the more stable the Overwatch Council's economic foundation, and it can always maintain this independent position. Chen Pingping laughed coldly. Since the beginning of the bloodshed 13 years ago, the emperor has made who knows how many new policies. The old Ministry of Military Affairs was changed to the Council of Military Affairs, and now it is changed to the Bureau of Military Affairs. He has also re-established the Ministry of War. This is just a small example. These things in name, changed again and again, seem to have no impact on the bones, but in reality, they have kneaded these departments into a big pile of dough. And the reason the Overwatch Council has always been like it was before is because of the so-called independence. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. This is all because of the Emperor's words. So you must fight. Chen Pingping stared coldly into his eyes. If there is a day in the future when the palace wants to crush the Overwatch Council, you must fight. If the Overwatch Council also becomes a broken thing like the Supreme Court, then our Qin Kingdom. I'm afraid it will slowly become a broken thing like the Wei Kingdom. Fan Xian understood the old cripple's worries. He had seen more than him, and naturally understood the importance of the so-called independence of the Overwatch Council. So, the Palace Treasury and the Overwatch Council have always been one and the same. Chen Pingping said each word clearly. Your father's thinking was really childish. To be in charge of the Palace Treasury, you must have power in your hands and firmly control this council. And to control this council, you must ensure the council's blood supply. Don't underestimate this thing called money. This small thing is enough to destroy the most tightly controlled organization in the world. Hearing him talk about his father, Fan Xian, as his son, could not say much. He could only silently accept the lesson. That day, Fan Xian went to the First Bureau and officially took up his post. The yamen of the First Bureau was not in the square, gray-black building of the Overwatch Council. Instead, it was in a courtyard next to the Supreme Court in the east of the city. The door looked solemn, but the sign on the door almost made Fan Xian spit on the face of Ting Zijing, who was acting as a coachman. He leaned against the wall of the carriage and resisted the urge to laugh. He looked at the sign, which he thought was neither fish nor fowl. The First Bureau of the Overwatch Council of the Qin Kingdom. Fan Xian suddenly felt as if time had reversed. He thought he had come to another time and space, to the door of a prosecutor's office in a city famous for its oil field. The carriage was light, and Mu Tai had not been notified beforehand. The council's official documents had not yet been issued, so the Overwatch Council officials of the First Bureau did not know that a new leader would be arriving today. The gatekeeper looked at the carriage in front of the yamen and muttered to himself. The young man standing outside was holding his belly and laughing like an idiot. What a waste of that pretty face of his. He stood there for a long time and did not come in. What was he doing? At this time, Fan Xian had already led Deng Ziyue and a few of his trusted aides inside. Ting Zijing did not want to go in. From the bottom of his heart, he wanted to stay away from the Overwatch Council. The gatekeeper was an old man nearly 50 years old. He hurried out and stopped them. Sirs, what can I do for you? Fan Xian was slightly surprised. The first time he had rushed into the Overwatch Council, no one had stopped him. That was because no one else was going to wander into the Overwatch Council later. His mind worked quickly. Seeing the gatekeeper come to stop him, he wondered if the First Bureau had a lot of officials visiting them on a regular basis. Although he was not wearing his official robes today, Deng Ziyue and the others were still wearing the uniform of the Overwatch Council. So the gatekeeper did not know who they were, and his tone was relatively gentle. Fan Xian ignored him and walked straight in. Deng Ziyue held up his hand to stop the old man, and they walked straight into the yamen. Once inside, Fan Xian realized that the First Bureau was indeed different. Not only did no one come up to greet him, but after walking through a few rooms, he found that the rooms were empty. When it was time to be on duty, there was not a single person. He was a little confused. He found a chair in the side hall and sat down. He could faintly hear the sounds of chatter coming from the back of the yamen. There were a few officials in the Chinian unit. Coincidentally, one of them was with the commissioner today. His name was Su Wenmao. Seeing that Fan Xian did not look pleased, he hurried to the registration room to look for the official on duty. Unexpectedly, he could not find him. Su Wenmao was also puzzled. He had only left the first bureau for a year. Why had the atmosphere in the yamen become so strange? Fortunately, he was an old man. Even if he could not find him, he could still find tea and hot water. He hurriedly and respectfully made a cup of tea and brought it to Fan Xian. Fan Xian was not in a hurry. He held the teacup in his hands and sipped it gently. Like the old officials in the court, he maintained his composure. Deng Ziyue glared at Su Wenmao. What he meant was, after all this time, no one had come out. Su Wenmao stood by Fan Xian's side, his body half bent with a bitter smile on his face. He did not dare to respond. He truly did not think that the first bureau of the Overwatch Council would, under Director Chen's might, become like an idle yamen. The gatekeeper poked his head in from outside the door and saw that these officials were only drinking tea. He guessed that they were waiting for someone, so he didn't bother to pay them any more attention. Thus, they sat awkwardly in the middle of the hall. Fan Xian was getting impatient. He stood up and motioned for them to sit, while he walked to the cupboard at the side of the hall. He began to flip through the files that had long been covered in dust. He thought to himself that no one had come to stop him. The discipline of the first bureau was truly broken. Suddenly, a few people walked in, talking and laughing. Looking at their uniforms, they were all officials of the Overwatch Council. In their hands they carried large bamboo baskets. In the baskets there were fish chilled. They looked quite fresh. When these people passed by Fan Xian's group, they did not look them in the eye. Only one of them caught a glimpse of Su Wenmao and laughed loudly. "Old Su, how come you have time to come back today?" Su Wenmao's face was full of awkwardness. He saw Fan Xian's hand gesture in the corner and could only smile. "Today, the commissioner is reporting to the council. We have nothing to do, so we brought you guys for a walk." On the way north, the Chinian unit knew of Fan Xian's methods. Under the pressure, they did not dare to say a word of warning. The man clapped his hands and called for the others to bring in the basket of fish. With an envious expression, he said to Su Wenmao, "Old Su, you have made a meteoric rise. If you follow that young master, won't you be able to do whatever you want in the future?" Su Wenmao considered his words and carefully replied, "The commissioner's demands are strict. I don't dare to use his name to mess around outside." The man laughed and said, "Let's not talk about that. In any case, these good things will not fall into the hands of the first bureau. Let's go." At the same time, he called out to Deng Ziyu's colleagues, "Since you're here, don't leave first. Everyone knows how long the meeting in the council will take. Come in with me to rub some." Deng Ziyu huffed coldly and turned his face to the side. Seeing that he did not give him face, the man's face revealed an embarrassed expression. He thought hatefully, "Isn't it just holding on to Commissioner Fan's leg? What's there to be proud about?" He paid them no more attention. After chatting with Su Wenmao for a bit, he prepared to leave. Just then, Fan Xian walked out. With a warm expression, he asked, "Brother, earlier I saw you bring in a basket of fish. Are you going to eat this for lunch? I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you for a meal." The light in the yamen was dim, so the man did not see Fan Xian's face clearly. He only knew that he was a young man. He laughed and said, "Of course I can't bear to eat it. We'll give it home later." "Looks like it's a valuable fish. Otherwise, it wouldn't be packed in ice," Fan Xian said. "Of course." The man squinted at Deng Ziyu and showed a proud expression. Dreamy cloud fish, shipped 800 li south. They were fished from a large lake. They're incredibly delicious. If they don't keep them chilled, they would have gone bad long ago. In Jingdo, even those high-ranking officials would find it difficult to eat them. Only the military has the ability. Fortunately, we are the first bureau of the Overwatch Council. Otherwise, we wouldn't have such good food. So it was sent by the military. Fan Xian smiled. He knew that the various departments in Jingdo would try their best to please the first bureau, but he didn't think they would put in so much effort. The man cupped his hands and said, "Let's not talk anymore. Since you are waiting for the commissioners' meeting to end, then please sit for a while. I'll go in and snatch my own fish, and then I'll come out to talk with you." Fan Xian said, "Don't panic. We still have something we need to see Master Mu about. It's just that we haven't been able to find him. I hope you can help us." The man looked at him and smiled. "I thought it was a big deal. I'll go inform him. You wait here." The man laughed and walked to the backyard. As soon as he left Fan Xian's line of sight, his expression changed. He jogged into a room at the back of the yamen and kicked the door open. Inside the room, there were a few people sitting at a table playing mahjong. Being disturbed like this, they jumped in fright and couldn't help but curse. Mu Tai, who was sitting at the head of the table, had an unfriendly expression on his face. He turned a green mahjong tile into a hidden weapon and threw it at the man. "Are you going to a funeral? How can a few fish make you so hungry?" The man trembled. "Master Mu, a young man has come to the bureau." Mu Tai frowned and said proudly, "What kind of person is that? If it's someone we know, then bring him here. I don't want to give up such a good mahjong tile." "I don't know him." The man's voice trembled. "But Su Wenmao is with him. I think, could it be that young master has come?" Mu Tai was shocked. He slammed the table and stood up. He pointed at the man's nose and scolded, You have to take responsibility for what you say." He was so frightened that he stood up and paced in circles. "Is it really the commissioner?" "I think so." The man's face was full of grievance. "In front of him, I didn't dare recognize him. I pretended I didn't know him and came to inform you. If it really is Commissioner Fan, you have to be careful." Mu Tai's face was full of panic. He quickly ordered his men to remove the mahjong table and rearrange it like an office. He jogged with the man to the front hall of the yamen. As he ran, he said, "Fenger, you have done well. Go back and ask your aunt to introduce you to a good marriage." "Damn, why did the commissioner suddenly come? Thank goodness you reacted so quickly. You are truly worthy of the first bureau of the Overwatch Council. You did not neglect your disguise work. Good, very good." The secret agent called Fenger wiped the ice water on his hands on the back of his clothes and said, "It's Lord Mu's good leadership, good leadership." Chapter 265. Mu Tai's face darkened, and he slowly walked out of the hallway. Without even looking at the person sitting in the side hall, he coldly said, "Who is it that insists on seeing me? Don't you know that the first bureau is very busy?" Su Wenmao saw that his former colleagues were always looking out for him. His eyes darted around, and he gave Mu Tai a meaningful look. Mu Tai already knew who was coming, but he was just putting on an act. He pretended to be reminded by Su Wenmao, and suspiciously turned his head to look behind him. There, he saw the young man. "You are." Mu Tai frowned and took a step closer. Suddenly, he turned pale with fright and knelt down on one knee. "I am Mu Tai. Greetings, Commissioner." Fan Xian looked at him expressionlessly. He had no interest in playing along. Mu Tai's face was still full of shock, and he happily said, "Sir, why didn't you tell me you were coming to the first bureau? I made you wait outside. What should I do?" Fan Xian still did not speak, but a smile appeared on his lips. Mu Tai looked at this smile, and his heart began to grow cold. Everyone knew that every time Sir Fan Jr. smiled the sweetest, it was also when he was the angriest in his heart. Thus, he could not help but lower his voice. This, sir, this. Fan Xian still did not speak and only smiled at him. Mu Tai's dark face showed a trace of regret. He did not dare to say anything more and he knelt down again. In the side hall of the first bureau, the atmosphere was very oppressive. Fan Xian did not want to see him make a fool of himself again. After all, Mu Tai was the registrar of the first bureau. After Zhu Ji's suicide, he was basically in charge of the first bureau's affairs. He frowned and said, "The side hall is too dirty. It's not suitable for receiving guests." Mu Tai was stunned and immediately became happy. He angrily yelled at Feng Er, "Get someone to clean it up. It's against the rules to leave the files in the hall like this." Fan Xian smiled. Mu Tai leaped high into the air and shouted for the officials of the first bureau to come out. They began to move the dusty files into the dark room behind them. These officials were all slacking off. They walked out weakly and saw Master Mu standing obediently next to a young man. They did not know Fan Xian, but they were all intelligence officers. Their brains worked very fast and they immediately guessed the identity of this young man. Startled, they hurriedly went about their business. In a short while, the side hall had been swept clean, and the files were neatly organized. It looked like the first bureau of the Overwatch Council still retained their original ability to react quickly. "I'll give you an hour. Other than those who have council business in the various departments and manors today, and those whose identities cannot be revealed, I want to see all the employees of the first bureau." Fan Xian lifted the hem of his robe and sat down on a chair. He held out his hand, and Mu Tai placed the teacup in his hand. Dejectedly, he said, "I'll go now." He knew that this young master was not easy to fool, and that his future was in Fan Xian's hands. All he could do was work seriously, hoping to reduce Fan Xian's dislike of him. "You don't have to go yourself. It's such a small matter." Fan Xian took his hand back and took a sip of tea. He found that it was already cold, and he couldn't help but grin. Mu Tai quickly reached out his hand to change it. Fan Xian stared at him and placed the teacup on the clean table beside him. "Come with me. I have something to tell you." Mu Tai hurriedly ordered his subordinates to call back all of the first bureau's employees, who were always out and about, while he himself followed Fan Xian to the backyard. Seeing Fan Xian step into the room he had just come out of, Mu Tai felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. Fan Xian frowned and looked at the jade mahjong tile under the threshold. This is the most powerful yamen in the Overwatch Council. Even their mahjong tiles are made of jade. Mu Tai was sweating profusely as he explained, "It's fake jade. I wouldn't dare lie to you. This is a new product made by the palace treasury 2 years ago. It looks like jade, but it won't break." Back then, one of the 8 bureaus was given a set. The first bureau's set has always been in the yamen, and no one has dared to take it home. Normally, when there isn't much work to do, we play with it occasionally. I am ashamed. I hope you will punish me severely. Fan Xian shook his head. "We'll talk about that later. I'm just a little disappointed that the first bureau of the Overwatch Council is so bad at hiding their track. Did you play mahjong here earlier? If you've already taken it, why is there another tile under the threshold?" Mu Tai wiped the sweat from his forehead. He knew that this was the tile he had used to hit his nephew. When his subordinates were cleaning up the room, they must have forgotten about it. Fan Xian sat down and looked at him. "Tell me, how did you become an official? It's not a big crime to play mahjong when you have nothing better to do." Mu Tai's heart skipped a beat. So none of this was a big crime. Just as he was feeling at ease, he suddenly heard a loud bang. He was frightened, and he looked at Commissioner Fan with a timid expression. Fan Xian slammed his palm heavily on the table. With his current strength, it would have been easy for him to smash the wooden table into pieces. But this time, he only made a loud noise. In a cold voice, he scolded, "When I saw that basket of fish earlier, I realized that you dared to take bribes from the various bureaus. Do you want to die? If the council finds out, I'm afraid the Internal Affairs Bureau will be the first to skin you. Mu Tai hurriedly knelt in front of him. He mumbled for a long time, unable to say anything. He thought that a basket of fish was not a big deal. Fan Xian coldly scolded him. Do you think a basket of fish is not a big deal? But you must know the iron rules of the council, especially when it comes to supervising the officials in the capital. If you play with those officials like brothers, how will you supervise them in the future? Fan Xian had always seemed like a gentle person, but gentle people could occasionally get angry. His words were cold and oppressive, and it made Mu Tai feel terrified. Fan Xian looked at the official kneeling in front of him. He couldn't help but feel disappointed and surprised. Not only because of the first bureau he was about to take over, but also because of the man in front of him. Rise. According to the council's rules, there was no need to be so strict between superiors and subordinate. But Mu Tai knew that he had to maintain a proper attitude. After all, he had some history with Fan Xian. Hearing Fan Xian's words, he dared to stand up. Fan Xian looked at Mu Tai's impressive face. His lips were like thin iron, and his complexion was dark. He couldn't help but frown. In the entire capital, you are the first person to know my true identity. Mu Tai's heart sank. Last year, when he was investigating Yulon Street, he had taken the liberty of going to Fan Manor to ask questions. At that time, the Fan household was not as popular as it was now. But this young man in front of him had revealed his identity, and he knew that he was the legendary commissioner of the council. This had been a rare opportunity. He had thought that he would have to struggle for many years, but in the end it had all gone to Wang Qinyan's old man. In this year you have helped me with some things, Fan Xian said, squinting. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and said, logically speaking, you should have used my connections more often, but you didn't. This made me very happy. I thought you were a sincere person. I just didn't expect that in a year you would change so much. You went from an honest person who felt awkward even when flattering Sima Qian to the wily old bureaucrat who only knows how to muddle through life and learn to change faces. I am very disappointed. The words, very disappointed, made Mu Tai feel even more disappointed in himself. He knew that although he was not as close as Wang Qinian and Commissioner Fan, and he did not expect to be in charge of such a large area by himself, in the past year, he had been promoted from a 7th-ranked official to a 5th-ranked official. Even if he thought with his butt, he knew that this was all because of Commissioner Fan. He took a deep breath and did not try to explain himself. He only said in a low voice, Sir, please watch my performance in the future. Fan Xian noticed that Mu Tai had changed from a lowly official to a lowly official, and he straightened his back a little. There was a hint of admiration in his eyes. He said, That's good. Not everyone has the talent to be a supporting character. Don't always remember Wang Qinyan's style. You should return to being the person who was wholeheartedly investigating the case, and I will naturally not hinder your future. After the storm came the sunny weather, and after the sunny weather came the storm again. Mu Tai looked at the commissioner in front of him, thinking that this man's mind was really like the summer that had just passed in the capital. He heard Fan Xian ask in a low voice, Tell me, how did this place become so rotten? I've been to the other places in the council, and they can't compare. The officials in the other places are all cautious and conscientious. Not to mention playing mahjong, even going out to pay their respects has to be rushed, and there's no wind. Look at this place. What's the difference between this and a wet market? Mu Tai had already thrown caution to the wind. He wanted to be himself again, and he wanted to cling to Sir Fan Jr.'s thick thighs. He did not hide anything, and directly said, Sir, I cannot escape the blame for the first bureau becoming like this. But for the past year, there has been no official to manage it, and the people below me do not accept me, so naturally they have become lax. Fan Xian was very clear on this matter. Back then, the head of the first bureau, Zhu Guo, secretly relied on Xinyang and leaked information about Yan Bingyun, which led to Yan Bingyun's arrest in the north. Later, the council investigated, and Zhu Guo failed. He committed suicide in a secret room during the council's joint conference. This was one of the most sensational events since the founding of the Overwatch Council. Since that day, the first bureau had been without a head. One reason was that Chen Pingping wanted to wait for Yan Bingyun to return, and the other was that the position was very sensitive. Secretly monitoring all the officials in the capital, if this kind of power was used, it could bring many benefits. At the time, the council did not have a suitable candidate, so it had been delayed. Even if there was no official to manage it, the rules and regulations have always been there. Why is no one doing anything? Has the council never reprimanded you? Fan Xian asked, somewhat puzzled. Mu Tai also didn't understand. He shook his head and continued, Sir, you said that the rules are there, but if we want the first bureau to do something, the council has to issue an order. Without a head to speak, we ordinary officials can't find our own excuses, so we go to the manners of the vice ministers and scholars. Fan Xian was startled. He said angrily, Did the second bureau not send any intelligence over this past year? They did. Mu Tai looked at him. But according to the laws of the Qin Kingdom, we have no right to investigate officials above the third level. We have to ask for an edict or at least get the approval of the director. Fan Xian said helplessly, You can't touch anyone above the third level for now. What about those below the third level? Mu Tai replied, Sir, I dare not hide this from you. Although the first bureau is the most important department in the council in name, in reality, it has always been the most incompetent department. The reason is very simple. The second and third bureaus only deal with intelligence, poisons, weapons, and such inanimate objects. The fifth and sixth bureaus are responsible for security, the seventh bureaus deal with criminals, and the eighth bureaus deal with books. Of the 8 bureaus, only the first bureau and the fourth bureau deal with people, and the fourth bureau's energy is mainly focused on foreign countries and the provinces. Who would dare to compete with the people of the fourth bureau? They could just find a random excuse to remove the county magistrate. Who would dare to say anything? At this point, he couldn't help but laugh at himself. We, the first bureau, are deep in the capital. We look impressive, but in reality, the people we deal with are the officials of the court and the local officials of the capital. In terms of status, they are more respected than we are. In terms of status, the officials of the capital see the first bureau of the Overwatch Council, so it's natural for them to be friendly to us. If the 6 bureaus have something to gain, they won't forget about us. But if they really want to compete, they won't be afraid of us. Fan Xian thought this wasn't right. Where in his previous life had he heard of such a cowardly brocade guard? For those below the third level, you have the right to file a case and conduct independent investigations. If they are afraid of you, they will try to please you. Why would they dare compete with you? Mu Tai laughed at himself. Sir, those officials may be below the third level, but what about their teachers? These officials have long ago woven a big net all over the capital. Some cases, even if we find evidence, can't be reported. Fan Xian squinted and asked, Why? It's simple. The brothers of the first bureau also have to live in the capital. Mu Tai sighed. Although the salary is much higher than that of ordinary officials, the relatives of the family still have to find a way to make a living. They find jobs in the various yamen. Even if you don't deal with these officials, even if you sell vegetables, if you investigate a scribe in the capital government, the capital's magistrate will have the ability to shut down your vegetable stand. The reason he uses is very much in line with the laws of the Qin Kingdom. You can't find any fault with it. As for those who are connected to the palace, they won't even look at us. Like Dai Jun of the Vegetable Inspection Bureau in Dengshi, he is a well-known corrupt official, but we can't touch him. Why? Because Eunuch Dai of the palace is his uncle. Ever since Master Zhu committed suicide to escape punishment, the First Bureau has no one to lead them. The officials under him won't easily offend the officials in the capital. Who doesn't have relatives? We're all in the bureaucracy, so we have to leave some room to meet in the future. Mu Tai said with shame, I'm not afraid of your anger, sir. This year I've been trying to protect myself. Other than the big cases handed down by the council, I haven't investigated anything else. Sir, it's not that I don't have the guts, it's just that living in the capital is not easy. There are too many officials that I have to deal with. Fan Xian didn't say anything. He calmly said, From now on, talk to me like this. Rectification. The first thing to be rectified is that people don't do practical things. They only know how to please their superiors. Hearing the term rectification was new to Mu Tai. He felt an inexplicable sense of fear. He quickly asked Fan Xian for instructions. After a while, Fan Xian spoke expressionlessly. Mu Tai listened with a look of admiration. He was afraid that he would forget, so he ground the ink and scribbled. After some time, Deng Ziyu finally knocked on the door and reported, Sir, everyone is here. In the first bureau of the Overwatch Council, other than the people who had stayed behind to guard the capital, there were 310 members in total. Other than those who were investigating the case and the spies, buried in the manners of the officials, everyone who could come was basically all present. They took up an entire piece of flat ground in the back courtyard. Everyone had already tidied up their clothes and stood solemnly, waiting for the commissioner to speak to them. Fan Xian sat in a chair in front of everyone. He had no intention of standing up. He looked at these people and nodded slightly. He realized that a year of laxity had not completely worn away the solemn atmosphere around these people. He could still smell a trace of the gloominess of the Overwatch Council's spies. He was quite satisfied with this. Mu Tai leaned forward and whispered in his ear, The First Bureau is a bit special. The spies here are not secret. Everyone here has revealed their identities. Most of them are still in hiding. The spies' names are kept in the yard and cannot be accessed. If you want to see them, you will need the First Bureau's report and the director's warrant. He thought of Fan Xian's status and paused. You are the commissioner, so you do not need the director's warrant. But you will need the First Bureau's report. I will write it in a bit. Fan Xian shook his head. After a moment of silence, he smiled. There is no need. From today onwards, I will be in charge of the First Bureau. If you want me to write a report, I will have someone write it. Mu Tai's body stiffened. He had thought that Fan Xian was only here for an inspection. He did not expect that he would be in charge of the First Bureau. But when he thought of the fact that he could work with Fan Xian in the future, and that it would be easier to get close to him, a trace of joy appeared on his face. There was a long silence on the flat ground. Fan Xian did not say anything. The hundreds of members of the First Bureau stood in the same posture, as if they were javelins. Although they were not soldiers, their uniform black was still very pleasing to the eye. It gave off the feeling of Scotland Yard on a rainy day. After a long time, Fan Xian stood up and quietly said, I am Fan Xian. From today onwards, I will be your chief official. Most people had guessed who he was, but when they heard that the world-famous Sir Fan Jr. was coming to the First Bureau as a chief official, they were slightly surprised, but more than that, they were happy. After Zhu Ji's death, not only did the First Bureau find it difficult to carry out its work in the capital, they were even looked down upon by the council. Now, with Sir Fan Jr. taking the lead, who else in the other 7 bureaus would dare to make excuses? The various departments and yamens in the capital would probably offer even more benefits in secret. But what Fan Xian said next sent a chill down everyone's spine. I know how you have spent the past year, Fan Xian said with a smile. From today onwards, you can no longer live like this. After throwing out this simple conclusion, he sat back in his chair and glanced at Mu Tai. Mu Tai stood up and coughed twice. He looked at his subordinates in a very dignified manner and said, "Today, I have gathered everyone here mainly because the Commissioner has some things to say at the beginning of his term. I have been entrusted by the Commissioner to say a few words. The main idea was decided by the Commissioner. Please listen carefully, my colleagues." The officials in the council listened attentively. "Today, I would like to talk about the style of the First Bureau." Mu Tai furrowed his brows and said bitterly, "Why is there an Overwatch Council? Why do we have the First Bureau? Because there are corrupt officials in the court who lie to His Majesty, oppress the people, and violate the laws of the Qin Kingdom. His Majesty wants to supervise the government, the people want to live and work in peace, and the dignity of the Qin Kingdom's laws must be upheld. So, there must be a bureau." The officials were stunned. Sir Mu had always been good at handling cases. When did he learn to write such articles about officialdom? But with His Majesty, the people, and the Qin Kingdom's laws weighing down on them, no one dared to say anything. "We are the First Bureau. We are His Majesty's eyes and ears. If we want to be able to hear and see well and share His Majesty's burden, we must be in sync. Our troops must be strong, and our orders must be carried out like a mountain. Otherwise, the supervision of the officials in the capital would be like a castle in the air. What are the problems in the First Bureau today? His Majesty's instructions are wise and correct, and the First Bureau's work has been fruitful. In this regard, the Commissioner has praised us greatly." Mu Tai's tone suddenly changed and he said coldly, "But, in the past year, there have been many problems in the First Bureau. As the acting supervisor, I am responsible. Tomorrow I will ask for punishment. But from today onwards, you are not allowed to do anything that violates the rules of the Overwatch Council. You are not allowed to privately or in the name of the First Bureau to accept gifts and benefits that can be converted into money from other departments of the court. You are not allowed to refuse any reports for any reason. You are not allowed to have daily contact with officials of any departments under any name. If a case requires a banquet, you must report in advance, and the minimum number of guests must be at least 3. Increase the organization of the routine work, and strictly implement the rules of the Overwatch Council and the relevant rules. In the past year, if you have done anything inappropriate, please report to me within 10 days, and I will forgive you." Mu Tai was still talking incessantly, but the officials of the First Bureau grew nervous. They did not know that this was the so-called rectification movement, but they could tell that if Commissioner Fan really did go all out, they would never be able to get the benefits they had earned this year again. Furthermore, they would have to throw themselves back into the dangerous and glorious work of offending the officials of the capital. Everyone could not help but look embarrassed and resentful. Even so, they still did not whisper or retort. They did not behave like the officials of the 6 ministries. Although their expressions fluctuated, they still stood firmly with great control. The Overwatch Council, which Chen Pingping had single-handedly trained, was, in terms of foundation and essence, the most solid spy team in the world. Mu Tai finished speaking. Fan Xian stood up and put his hands behind his back. He smiled and said, "If you have any opinions, say them now." The crowd was silent. The difference between the status of the ordinary secret agents and investigators of the Overwatch Council and Fan Xian, who was favored by the heavens, was too great. No one dared to argue in front of him. Fan Xian smiled and tried to draw the snake out of its hole. "It's a collective brainstorming. The director has sent me to the First Bureau because he thinks highly of my colleagues. You all know that I am busy, and I can't be bothered to go to a normal yamen." After he said this, the officials in the court relaxed a little. It was rumored that Commissioner Fan hid a dagger behind his smile, but at this moment they could not see it. He was of noble birth, and was a world-famous scholar. How could he be proficient in the dirty work of the Overwatch Council? They agreed for now, and would think about it later. They all bowed and said, As you command, Commissioner Fan. Fan Xian frowned, a little dissatisfied. Mu Tai was close, and he could see the coldness in Fan Xian's eyes. He thought Fan Xian was dissatisfied that his subordinates did not appear to be loyal. Worried, he quickly gave Fenger, who was standing in the front row, a look. This person was his distant nephew, also surnamed Mu. Mu Fenger saw his uncle's look and thought he wanted him to stand up and object, but how could he dare say no to the commissioner? His heart was filled with fear and his legs trembled. In the end, he remembered the kindness his uncle had shown him. He steeled his heart, gritted his teeth, and stood out of the line of soldiers. Without any hesitation, he saluted and said, "Commissioner, although the position of the First Bureau is to supervise the officials in the capital, it is difficult to avoid social interactions. Everyone has relatives, such as my brother-in-law, who is currently working in the Cavalry Bureau. If I do not interact with him on a daily basis, that is fine, but I am afraid that my fierce wife at home will not stop arguing." These words seemed mischievous, but no one dared to laugh. No one knew why Mu Fenger was so bold today. Fan Xian was happy, but his face was gloomy. In a cold voice, he scolded, "Do you think the rules of the council are a pile of dog shit that you can slap on your face however you want? The rules have long been made clear that relatives within 3 generations are not included after they have been registered. If you insist on saying this, is there something wrong? Mu Tai, drag your distant nephew away and serve him according to the rules." Mu Tai sighed and dragged his nephew away with a face full of resentment to be flogged. Fan Xian's cold gaze swept across the crowd. "Is there anything else you want to say?" Everyone knew he was using his official power to oppress people, but they did not expect there to be a stubborn person among the secret agents. They stood out and bowed in a low voice. "Commissioner, investigating cases is what we should do, but what if we are threatened by nobles? What if we encounter officials making things difficult at home? What if the eunuchs in the palace speak?" There was silence. What the First Bureau feared most when investigating cases was running into officials with connections to the palace. No matter how powerful the Overwatch Council was, they were still just thugs raised by the palace. Fan Xian looked at him calmly and said, "Say my name." These 5 words were loud and clear. "Whoever dares to make things difficult for you, regardless of whether they are officials or nobles, just say my name." In the present Jingdo, Fan Xian indeed had the confidence to say such words. Even if the people in the palace still showed a glimmer of pride in front of him, if it came down to it, probably none of the 3rd-level officials or nobles would dare to take the risk of offending Fan Xian and bully his subordinates. With the power of the Overwatch Council in his left hand and the wealth of the world in his right, who would want to offend Fan Xian? Fan Xian looked at the official who had stepped out and felt some admiration. After he had deliberately suppressed Mu Tai, the official still dared to stand out and speak. Thinking of this, he slowed down and said gently, "What other opinions do you have? Say them all. I will not punish you." The official actually had nothing more to say. He braced himself and said, "I believe that it is only natural that individuals do not accept money. But it is fine to accept some in the name of the First Bureau. On one hand, it is better to have a good relationship with the 6 ministries. In the future, it will be easier to investigate cases. On the other hand, after the money is distributed, it can be considered a supplement." Fan Xian looked at the people in the council. He knew that these people also cared about the money. He couldn't help but laugh coldly. "In terms of salary, you all receive 3 times more than the court officials of the same rank. Although you are not as rich as the court officials, this was the original intention of the council when it was founded. What is there to complain about?" Su Wenmao, who had been standing behind him the entire time, boldly said, "The Overwatch Council has always suffered the backlash of the officials and the disdain of the people. The First Bureau is in a special situation, and the court is not willing to subsidize it, so." Fan Xian shook his head and stopped him from speaking. He looked calmly at the Overwatch Council secret agents and officials present. He waited until the atmosphere had been squeezed, until it was incomparably silent. Only then did he say, word by word, "Don't ask what the court has done for you. Ask yourself what you have done for the court." Su Wenmao was stunned. After thinking about it for a while, he realized that there was a deeper meaning to it. He couldn't help but feel a sense of shame and admiration. Yes, when the officials of the First Bureau were planning for themselves, did they ever think about why the court had established the Overwatch Council? The official who had stepped out to speak was also stunned. After so many years of education and influence from the council and Chen Pingping's admonition, it seemed that he had returned to the state of mind he had when he first stepped into the council. His heart warmed, he clenched his right fist and shouted, "Everything for the kingdom of Qing! Everything for the kingdom of Qing!" This was the motto that everyone present had to remember on their first day in the Overwatch Council. Fan Xian looked at the scene and smiled with relief. He clenched his right fist and said to himself, "Everything for life." Chapter 266. The sky was dark. All of Jingdo was enveloped in a gloomy and somber atmosphere. The refreshing autumn air had disappeared. The cold rain that had continued for 3 or 4 days not only washed away the dust in the roof tiles of the private residences, but also washed the stone pavement clean. At the same time, it also brought the first chill of autumn in the 5th year of the Qing calendar. Fan Xian rubbed his hands together and sat on the 2nd floor of Xinfeng Restaurant. His gaze pierced through the layers of rain outside the window and looked at a yamen across the street. A little further in that direction was the yamen of the Supreme Court. Comparing the two yamens, the First Bureau appeared much quieter. However, the expressions of the Overwatch Council officials who went in and out were steady. They were no longer the same as before. The rectification had been going on for a few days. Of course, Fan Xian did not think that just shouting a few slogans and reiterating the rules would be enough to bring back the minds of all the officials. So, the secret self-examination and investigation had continued. After ruthlessly removing some people from their positions, and at the same time, even more ruthlessly sending some officials to the 7th Bureau for trial, the atmosphere in the First Bureau finally changed. The yamen, which was as precise as a machine, finally began to operate effectively. Fan Xian was not used to sitting in the First Bureau, so he refused Mu Tai's offer of a room. Instead, he booked a quiet room facing the street on the 2nd floor of the famous Xinfeng Restaurant. Every day, he would sit there and eat some snacks to kill time. At the same time, he could ensure that if something happened in the First Bureau, he would be able to react immediately. There was a steamer on the table in front of him. In the steamer about the size of 2 palms, there was a single steamed bun. From this, one could tell that this steamed bun had a thin skin and a large stuffing. It was indeed not small, and the white surface was filled with a delicious oil that was about to overflow, making one feel a little envious just by looking at it. He blew gently on the bun and used his chopsticks to unfold the longan, revealing the freshly oiled broth inside. Fan Xian took a tube of wheat straw and tilted his head. "Do you want some soup?" "Hot." Fan Xian smiled and used his chopsticks to open the eyes. He picked out the meat filling that had been soaked in the soup for a long time and had already started to taste. Using a small plate, he placed it into the bowl of the person beside him and coaxed, "The bao is the best. This soup is hot, but the meat is not. However, you still need to blow on it a bit." The bao was very obedient. Puffing his cheeks, he blew at the meat in the bowl with all his might. Tiger! 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 Ever since his father-in-law had resigned and returned home, the Lin Manor had become deserted. When Fan Xian was in northern Qi, De Bao spent most of his time in the manor. After he came back, he didn't see De Bao for a few days. He couldn't help but feel suspicious. After asking Wan He found out that she thought he had just returned, so she sent de Bao back to the Lin mansion. Fan Xian was not happy to hear this. Although others would not dare to make things difficult for Lin Manor for his sake, the servants in Lin Manor were the most cunning characters. Right now, Lin Manor was only looked after by Warner's distant relatives. How could he be at ease? Unfortunately, after he took over the first bureau, he had been busy for many days and did not have time to deal with this matter. Taking advantage of today's rain, and there was nothing to do in the capital, he called Deng Ziyu to bring de Bao out from the Lin mansion and sit with him in Xinfeng restaurant to taste the restaurant's most famous Jietong buns. After a while, they would return to the mansion. Stop boasting. You can eat now. Fan Xian chuckled and looked at his brother-in-law. For some reason, de Bao, who had the intelligence of a child, was especially obedient to Fan Xian's words. He quickly lowered his head and swallowed the meat in one gulp. Seeing how anxious he was, Fan Xian didn't know if he tasted it or not. Seeing this scene, Fan Xian couldn't help but think of Zhu Beiji eating ginseng fruit. He couldn't help but laugh. Deng Ziyu sat at another table. Seeing this scene, he couldn't help but feel a little strange. The Qinian unit that followed Fan Xian had a total of 30 people. They were divided into 4 squads to protect him. After Deng Ziyu took over Wang Qinian's position, he followed Fan Xian closely. So, he knew what Fan Xian had been doing these past few days. He thought to himself that the commissioner he followed was really an enigmatic person. After rectifying the atmosphere of the first bureau, he didn't give any specific instructions for a long time. Instead, he just stayed in Xinfeng restaurant every day to eat good food and listen to folk songs. For someone of Fan Xian's status to be so attentive to his retarded brother-in-law, Deng Ziyu was a little surprised and a little impressed. The sound of footsteps came from downstairs. Deng Ziyu immediately woke up from his idle thoughts. His hand tightly gripped the padao at his waist. His eyes were like an eagle's, staring at the stairs. The person who had come was Mu Tai. These days, he had been in charge of corrective work in the first bureau. He had to examine the subordinates who were suspicious, and at the same time, he had to maintain everyone's morale. He also had to deal with the task that Fan Xian had secretly given him. He was so busy that he didn't even have time to stroll around the building. His eyes were sunken, and there was an unhealthy gloominess on his dark face. Mu Tai took off the rain hat on his head, unbuttoned his raincoat, and threw it in the corner of the room. He carefully took out a cylinder from his bosom. He didn't know what material the cylinder was made of, but it was obviously waterproof, because the paper he pulled out from inside the cylinder was not wet at all. Fan Xian took it and carefully examined it line by line. His eyebrows gradually furrowed, and his face became gloomy. When he first returned to the capital, he had Deng Ziyu investigate the officials who were related to the second prince, to see if they had anything to do with the Cui family. Later, he took over the first bureau, and this task was directly given to Mu Tai. It was a test for him. There didn't seem to be any strong evidence on the paper, but this was what he had expected. The other party must have done it very cleanly, but it seemed a little too cleanly. Could it be that the Cui family, as big as they were, had not given any tributes to the Minister of Appointments and the Imperial Astronomer all these years? Fan Xian sighed in his heart and asked, "Everything is here?" Mu Tai nodded. Fan Xian asked again, "Did the second bureau ask anything?" Mu Tai looked at him and shook his head. "The second bureau is very cooperative, and they only think it's an order from the council. They don't know that it's the commissioner's will. Please don't worry, I can guarantee that no one knows." "There's no information from the second bureau?" Fan Xian realized that he was still holding the chopsticks in his hand. He knew that he was a little nervous about this matter. He laughed at himself and put the chopsticks on the side of the steamer. His biggest enemy now was the eldest princess, who was far away in Xinyang. No one knew when she would return to the capital, so he had to confirm that, after the crown prince and the eldest princess gradually drifted apart, who the princes in the court were, and who was on the same side as the eldest princess. Mu Tai's tone was still respectful, but with a hint of confidence. Although the second bureau is responsible for intelligence work in the capital, their sources are not as good as the first bureau's. Please don't worry, sir. Fan Xian nodded, indicating that he could leave. After Mu Tai left, Fan Xian looked at the small, densely packed words on the file and fell into deep thought. It recorded all the people the Chui family had bribed over the years, the time, and the reason. Most of the officials in the capital had connections, but there was no trace of the second prince's faction. This gave him a headache. His intuition told him that there was a problem, but he couldn't find anything useful in this complicated information. In reality, Fan Xian knew very well that his forte lay in assassination, holding power and creating momentum. In the end, under the gentleness on the surface, he only had the heart of an assassin. He was not an emperor who was good at controlling and manipulating people's hearts. He was also not a strategist who was good at analyzing intelligence and judging strategies. Knowing one's weaknesses and using one's strengths, Fan Xian used people in this way and analyzed himself in this way. Thinking of that meticulous plan in Shangjing, northern Qi, he couldn't help but sigh. He began to think of Wang Qinian, who seemed funny, but had actually helped him come up with many ideas. Of course, the true mastermind of that plan was Yan Bingyun. Fan Xian had originally planned to tie him to his belt after he returned to the capital. Who would have thought that the council would send Yan Bingyun to the fourth bureau and leave him in charge of the first bureau? It was no easy task to squeeze Sir Yan Jr.'s intelligence and strategy from an official point of view. He glanced at Debao and found that his brother-in-law was launching a final attack on a bowl of mixed-paste noodles. He couldn't help but smile. Picking up the steamed bun skin that had lost its meat filling, he reached into Debao's bowl and carelessly smeared some meat sauce on it. Then, he quickly stuffed it into his mouth and began to chew in large mouthfuls. Debao was stunned. He realized that a hand had brushed past his bowl. It took him a while to react. He slowly raised his head to look at Fan Xian, who was full of pride. He shook his head with some bitterness, then lowered his head to eat the noodles. Outside Xinfeng restaurant, the rain continued to fall. The force of the rain was great. After it hit the ground, it bloomed into countless balls of mist, gradually blurring people's eyes and obscuring the buildings around the street. A chill followed the raindrops and landed in Jingdo. It blew against the group of people in front of Xinfeng restaurant's door, wanting to burrow into their necks and borrow their warmth. Fan Xian draped a windbreaker over Debao's body and carefully fastened the buckle around his neck. Only after confirming that the cold wind wouldn't enter did he relax and pat his shoulder. Xian has to do some things. Debao can go back to the manor and play with Wan'er first, okay? Debao was chewing on an apple. He vaguely nodded his head and said, "My sister is too fierce." Fatty will play. Fan Xian understood what he meant and laughed out loud. He thought to himself, if all the officials, merchants, husbands, prostitutes, and poets all had a simple and peaceful heart like Debao, perhaps his own life would be much simpler and more relaxed. He carefully said a few words to Ting Zijing. The Fan Manor carriage took the young uncle back to the manor. Deng Ziyu glanced at Fan Xian and asked in a low voice, "Sir, where are we going at this time?" "To Yen Manor." Chapter 267. Deng Ziyu was slightly startled. He thought to himself, on this rainy day, instead of waiting in the bureau for his subordinates to show their filial respect, instead of eating heartily in Xinfeng restaurant, instead of going back to his manor to enjoy the warm tea, he insisted on going to Yen Manor in the face of the storm. He didn't know what he was thinking. "I'll go get a carriage," he said to Fan Xian in a low voice and prepared to walk to the opposite side of the street. Fan Xian shook his head and flipped his hand to cover his head with the hood of the raincoat. He was not afraid of the pouring rain outside. Just like this, he walked into the rain on Chang Street, allowing the rain to hit the gray-black clothes on his body. The Overwatch Council's official robes were very common, but there were special styles. For example, when investigating a case on a rainy day, they would often wear this kind of raincoat. The sleeves were wide but not long, and it was all made of waterproof material. There was a one-piece hat on the back. The style was a bit strange. It was like a windbreaker but also like a cloak. When the rain fell from the sky and landed on this clothing, it would slide down smoothly. Back then, when Shu the scholar first saw this kind of Overwatch Council clothing in Jingdo, he was greatly interested and gave it another name. Lotus clothes, using the meaning of rainwater sliding off lotus leaves like pearls. But, after all, the style of this kind of raincoat was a bit strange and did not fit in with the current sense of beauty. So, even with such a wonderful name as lotus clothes, it still did not spread among the people. Only the officials and spies of the Overwatch Council would wear this kind of clothing. So, in the current rainy days in Jingdo, as long as one saw this kind of person wearing a black and gray lotus clothes, everyone would know that the Overwatch Council had come out to do business and would hide like a ghost. Fan Xian walked first into the rain. The people of the Qinian unit did not dare to be negligent. Just like that moonlit night, they split into a few positions and surrounded him at a distance that was neither too far nor too close. They walked forward on the quiet rainy Chang Street. The rain pounded against their clothes, and their long boots stepped on the puddles. Tap, 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 tap. The few people in the mist unexpectedly had a silent and fierce aura. The owner of Xinfeng restaurant, who was bowing to send off the guests, raised his head slightly and looked at this scene. He thought to himself that this Commissioner Fan was truly an interesting person. Bringing along a few subordinates, he was able to wear these strange clothes beautifully and walk out with texture. The Yen Manor was not far. After walking for a while in the rain, they turned into a small alley. Once they came out and stood to the right, they could see the manor door, which was not very wide. Thinking of the father and son in this manner, who were in charge of all of the court's spy activities, even Fan Xian couldn't help but feel a glimmer of seriousness. Yen Ruahai was an old official who had been in charge of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council for 10 years. He was deeply favored by the emperor, as well as held in high regard by Chen Pingping. Even the 6 ministers of the court did not dare to be too arrogant in front of him. When the Overwatch Council was first set up, the official ranks were set very low. Later on, for the sake of convenience, the emperor basically used the method of bestowing titles and titles to forcibly raise the political status of the Overwatch Council officials. For example, Yen Ruahai had become a second-rank viscount a few years ago. Last year, Yen Bingyun had been betrayed by the eldest princess to Northern Qi. In order to appease the loyal officials of the Overwatch Council, the emperor directly promoted Yen Ruahai's title to a 3rd-rank count. Even Fan Xian's father Fan Jian, who was now the Minister of Revenue, was only a 1st-rank count. From this, one could see how well the emperor treated the officials of the Overwatch Council. However, there was no new plaque on the door of the Yen Manor. The small title below the Yen Manor still read Jing Qingzi Manor, instead of Jing Qingzi Manor. The words were also in black instead of gold, making it appear extremely low-key. But Fan Xian knew that other than the officials who had been granted titles, only the officials who had been personally appointed by the emperor had the right to write their titles in front of the manor. From this, it could be seen that the Yen Manor was also bestowed by the emperor. Even if they wanted to be low-key, they could not. Standing at the manor gate, where the rain had yet to stop, the caretaker at the gate had long since seen them arrive. Seeing the raincoats they were wearing, he knew they were officials of the Overwatch Council, but he didn't know if they were colleagues of the master or friends of the young master. He hurriedly descended the steps, using his hand to shield himself from the rain, and welcomed Fan Xian and the others. Fan Xian lifted the rain hat off his head, revealing his slightly wet hair. "Is little Yen home?" he asked. The caretaker was about to say that the master was not home, but hearing the other party speak, he realized they were looking for the young master. Looking at the handsome face, he had long since guessed who it was. He respectfully said, "The young master is home. May I ask if you are the commissioner?" Fan Xian nodded and took off his raincoat, placing it on his forearm. The caretaker hurriedly took it, holding up an oil paper umbrella in his left hand. "Sir, please come in." This was a clever man. He knew that the young master had returned from the north and had a close relationship with Commissioner Fan, so he took the liberty of not announcing his arrival and welcomed them directly. Fan Xian had the same idea. He smiled at the caretaker and very naturally walked into the manor. After all, his rank was above that of the Yen father and son, so there was no need to be polite under these circumstances. This was the first time he had come to Yen Manor, and he couldn't help but be curious about the environment of the manor. But following the caretaker's umbrella, he did not see anything out of the ordinary along the way. There was just enough rain to moisten the surprisingly large fake mountain in the courtyard, making the moss on it seem as if it had returned to its youthful green. Past the fake mountain was the inner courtyard of Yen Manor. Fan Xian looked at the two people in the distant veranda, listening to the rain, and smiled. He waved his hand to indicate that no one should follow him, and he slowly stepped on the puddles of water on the stone floor, trying not to make a single sound as he approached the veranda. The veranda was in the rain, and the stone steps beside the pillars were soaked. Even the ground under the veranda was half wet. But the two people in the veranda remained unmoved. They sat on two chairs and stared blankly at the scene of the autumn rain. One of them was Sir Yen Jr., who had just returned to the capital not long ago. The other was Lady Shen, who had fled thousands of li. The two of them sat on the chairs and did not speak, nor did they look at each other. They only cast their gazes into the rain, as if hoping that the ceaselessly falling rain would weave into a curtain of pearls and reflect their gazes back into each other's eyes. Fan Xian laughed bitterly. He found that Yen Bingyun's face was still a sheet of frost, but there was a gentleness in his eyes. Lady Shen, who was beside him, seemed to have shaken off the misery of the day her family was ruined. There was a slight shyness on her face, but there was an additional trace of confusion in her eyes. But this pair of resentful lovers did not speak, did not look at each other, and acted as if the other did not exist. The scene was a little strange. What made Fan Xian feel even stranger was that Lady Shen was wearing the clothes of a servant girl. Her feet were shackled and dragged by a long chain. The end of the chain was inside the room. It looked like she had been chained up by Yen Bingyun. After watching quietly for a while, Fan Xian sighed in his heart. He knew that Yen Bingyun's mood was not as relaxed as he appeared. Otherwise, he would have been able to stand behind the two of them for so long without noticing. So he coughed lightly. Yen Bingyun turned his head and saw that hateful, gentle, smiling face. Anger flared in his eyes. He didn't know if it was because he was angry at being disturbed, or because he wanted to make trouble for Fan Xian because he had been forced to take a captive. Lady Shen saw Fan Xian, but she did not know what to feel. Her face darkened. She rose from the chair, bowed slightly, and entered the room. The clanking of the chains echoed endlessly in the rainy corridor. Yen Bingyun did not seem surprised that Fan Xian had barged into his manor. After inviting him to sit, there was no strange expression on his face. But Fan Xian was a little surprised at how quiet the Yen manor was. He sat in the chair that Lady Shen had left behind, feeling the lingering warmth of the seat. He couldn't help but feel his heart flutter. He forcibly suppressed his untimely and inappropriate thoughts and said, "I had thought that after you went through so much trouble to return to the capital, there would be many officials here to congratulate you. Who would have thought that on this rainy day, there would only be you and Lady Shern looking at each other and crying silently. Yen Bingyun explained very seriously, "First of all, I did not look at her. I think she did not care to look at me. Second of all, it was the sky that was crying, not me." Fan Xian shrugged his shoulders and said nothing. Yen Bingyun continued, "Father has never liked to interact with officials of the court, and I am not as famous as the commissioner in the capital. Naturally, the manner would be a little quieter." Fan Xian shook his head. "I know that before you went to Northern Qi, you were a famous young master in the capital. Now that you have returned home, you will certainly be promoted again. How could those people who want to curry favor with the Yen Manor not come knocking? Even if your family is the head of the Overwatch Council and does not belong to the same system as the court officials, I think no one would pass up such a great opportunity." Yen Bingyun's face was expressionless. "Father keeps 3 dogs. They are always tied outside the door, so no one dares to enter the manor." Fan Xian was surprised. He touched his slightly wet hair. "Why didn't I see them when I entered the manor?" Yen Bingyun said, "Today there was a heavy rain that stopped the guests. Those big black dogs have been working hard these past few days. Let them rest." Fan Xian was speechless. "Sir, what business do you have with your visit today?" It was clear that Sir Yen wanted to deliberately keep his distance from this Sir Fan Jr. Presumably, this was a result of his family upbringing. Fan Xian ignored this. He took out the cylinder, opened it, and threw it into Yen Bingyun's lap. Yen Bingyun picked it up and squinted at it. His expression was a bit unnatural. "Sir, you really do trust your subordinate. But this is a way for the First Bureau to survive. Showing it to me is already against the rules." Fan Xian looked at him with a smile. "Don't think that you can avoid me every day just because you are about to take over your father's position. You call me sir, so you know that even though I am in the First Bureau and you are in the Fourth Bureau, I am still a commissioner. If you really push me too far, I will send out a warrant and have you transferred to the First Bureau. If I demote you, you won't be able to do anything about it. So don't talk so much nonsense. Helping me look at this information is the right thing to do." Yen Bingyun flew into a rage. "How can you drag people into your muddy waters? If you use your authority to pressure me again, I will go to the director and reason with him." Fan Xian waved his hand. Looking at the rain outside, he laughed. "Say whatever you want. If I do end up bringing you to the First Bureau to be a registrar, don't regret it." Yen Bingyun swallowed the anger in his chest. He pointed at the information and said in a cold voice, "What do you want to know?" "A big question." Fan Xian laughed lightly and stood up. He walked in front of Yen Bingyun and looked at his cold yet beautiful face. "I want you to find out for me if there is any connection between the second prince and the Chui family." There was a heavy silence in the corridor. There was no shock or fear on Yen Bingyun's face. He pointed at the cylinder and said, "Since we were in Shangjing, I knew you were going to deal with the Chui family. You did not hide this from me. But the second prince? There has never been any rumor that he has anything to do with Xinyang." He naturally knew that Fan Xian was dealing with the Chui family because of the eldest princess. He was investigating the relationship between the Chui family and the second prince because he wanted to deal with the eldest princess. So he was a bit confused as to why the second prince would be involved. "Intuition," Fan Xian said calmly. "I did not hide the matter of dealing with Xinyang from the beginning. Because in this matter, there is a natural possibility that you and I will be allies. As for my suspicions of the second prince, it is because I discovered that in the half a year I was in Northern Qi, he had been too quiet in the Qin kingdom. Furthermore, it was only recently that I gradually learned that this seemingly inconspicuous second prince actually has such great power in the court. There are so many officials who are close to him." The reason why Fan Xian thought that the second prince was unusually quiet was because, from the perspective of his previous life, in the struggle for imperial power, the Crown Prince, who had an innate advantage, could basically guarantee his future as long as he did nothing. And in this year, without the eldest princess' secret influence, the Crown Prince had indeed done so. However, the second prince was different. If he wanted to ascend to the throne in the future, he had to do something. A quiet dog might bite, but a quiet prince must not seize power from others. Yan Bingyun looked at him strangely. It seems that you have decided to get involved in the struggle between the princes, after all. Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. No, I am just making preparations in case they fight in the future, until I don't even have a house to live in. Yan Bingyun was silent for a while, as if he was calculating the consequences of this matter. After all, as an official, there was no one who did not care about the future direction of the court, especially young and promising officials like Fan Xian and Yan Bingyun. Sir, are you on the Crown Prince's side? Yan Bingyun suddenly raised his head and looked directly into Fan Xian's eyes, somewhat unreasonably. He asked such a seemingly stupid, overly direct question that left no room for discussion. Fan Xian was slightly startled, but a smile slowly appeared on his face. He shook his head. No. Yan Bingyun was silent for a moment, then gradually smiled. So you are on the Emperor's side. Fan Xian did not say anything. He knew that Yan Bingyun would help him. Yan Bingyun had been locked up for a year, and had long been bored to death. Now that he had returned to the capital, he was still recuperating. If Fan Xian gave him such a fun and exciting thing to do, he was not afraid that he would not take the bait. Yan Bingyun lowered his head and carefully looked through the file again. He shook his head. Although the First Bureau's investigation of the capital is not as good as it was before, it is still not bad. But for something as big as this, it is impossible to rely solely on the intelligence reports in the capital. Information needs to be cross-referenced, and this information is already a finished product. It is not very valuable. I know Mu Tai. He is very capable of handling a single case, but for a big situation like this, he has no control. If you trust me, I will take care of this matter. Trust? Fan Xian looked at his lowered head. He looked at the silver strands between the eyebrows of this young man, who was only a few years older than him. He narrowed his eyes and said, I trust you. Trust was a simple and purely subjective matter. How long will it take? Yan Bingyun raised his head. His voice was calm, but it was filled with confidence. I will return to the Fourth Bureau next month. I will let you know before the end of the month. Fan Xian nodded. Is there anything I can help you with? Yan Bingyun shook his head. If this matter gets out of hand, I do not want to be a scapegoat. Don't worry. I love sheep. Fan Xian laughed. He was not only happy that the two of them seemed to have found the tacit understanding they had in Shangjing, northern Qi, and had begun to plan something together. He was even happier because he knew that if Yan Bingyun really began to investigate this matter, then in the future, Yan Bingyun could only follow Fan Xian. The relationship between the second prince and Xinyang had to be investigated, but it was more important to have Yan Bingyun join his team. Oh right. Yan Bingyun suddenly frowned. I want to ask for a soldier from you. Fan Xian asked curiously, you have been recuperating all this time. Are you secretly investigating something? As for asking for a soldier, Sir Yan has so many elite soldiers in the Fourth Bureau. Do you really need to ask me? Outside the corridor, the rain was coming down even more heavily. The pitter-patter pattered against the stone floor, as if it wanted to create countless pockmarks. The trees in the courtyard, having drunk their fill of water, began to droop their leaves, afraid of the torrential rain. Yan Bingyun's brows flashed with a hint of melancholy and worry. There is a serial murder case in the south, spanning across several prefectures. Many people have died in the 13 yamens of the Ministry of Justice, but they have not been able to catch the murderer. Thus, the case has been transferred to the council by His Majesty. Fan Xian nodded. He was a knowledgeable man. He remembered that when the two of them were in Shangjing, northern Qi, they had received a secret report from the council, but at the time they had not paid much attention to it. Yan Bingyun did not understand. This is within the jurisdiction of the Fourth Bureau. But after the Fourth Bureau took over, 13 secret agents died in succession, and not a single trace of the murderer was found. Furthermore, the way they died was extremely tragic. According to the report, the murderer was clearly a powerful martial cultivator, but there was no way to confirm what level he was. But seeing as he was able to kill so many investigating officers without a sound, I estimate that he was at least above the 9th level. Fan Xian began to take an interest in this matter. In today's world of peace, as long as a martial cultivator was above the 9th level, no matter what country he was in, he would be strongly recruited by the government. The court would do its best to welcome him, and even the military, for some reason, had changed its attitude in the past and began to recruit such experts. But there were not many experts above the 9th level in the world. Dongyi was the richest in the world, and Sigujian had opened his sword hut to welcome guests, so they had the most experts above the 9th level. So, an expert above the 9th level could be like the Yi family, a member of the military force protecting the Qin kingdom, or like Friar He of northern Qi, a skilled assassin outside of the court. Even if he loved freedom, at the very least, he could go to Dongyi and occasionally help Dongyi's merchant groups as a powerful figure behind the scenes. In his spare time, he could go to Sigujian's sword hut to compare skills with other martial cultivators. These were all choices that were rich, noble, and had status in the Jianghu. Serial murder. Was he planning to rape or rob? A 9th-level expert definitely did not need to do these things. Perhaps he was a psychopathic killer. Fan Xian sighed. He just liked the thrill of killing. Yan Bingyun furrowed his brows, as if he had not thought that such a person existed in the world. Of course, he did not completely understand what Fan Xian meant by psychopathic. The Fourth Bureau has suffered too many losses, so the court needs to send powerful martial artists south to investigate. But as you know, there are not many experts above the 9th level. The ones in the capital are all above my father, so the Fourth Bureau cannot say anything, and His Majesty will not agree. So, I am preparing to borrow soldiers from you. Fan Xian asked curiously. There are no such experts in the First Bureau. Even the guards at home are at most 2 7th-level experts, and that is already very impressive. Yan Bingyun curled his lips and smiled. I want to borrow Gundam, and those 6 long knives under his command. Fan Xian looked at his scheming spirit and wanted to slap him. In a cold and mocking voice, he said, Us 2 brothers have the same wish. I also wanted to keep Gouda by my side. The first thing I did was ask the old man for it. And the result? He spread out his hands. Same as you. It was all wishful thinking. How could someone from the palace lend them to us so easily? That, I don't care. Yan Bingyun smiled. In the future, if Gundam is transferred to your service, please lend it to the Fourth Bureau for a few days. Fan Xian was startled. Seeing the rare smile on Yan Bingyun's face, his heart thumped. He knew that the Yan family had other connections in the capital. Could it be that Yan Bingyun had heard something? Could it be that Gundam's 7 knives were going to be his? Thinking of this, he could not help but feel happy. Thank you for your auspicious words. If that day comes, I will lend them to you. Having finished talking about business, Fan Xian glanced at the quiet room and began to tease him. How have you been with Miss Shen? Yan Bingyun immediately turned into a block of ice at the mention of this. Sir, please conduct yourself with dignity, he said coldly. Dignity, my ass. Fan Xian scolded. You tied her up with an iron chain. That is asking her to conduct herself with dignity. But you are just like the assassins from the south I spoke of. Perverted. The rain continued to fall, and the atmosphere was not harmonious. Under the same roof, Fan Xian proudly bared his fangs and brandished his claws. Yan Bingyun was so angry that he could not speak. He could guess that the word perverted was not a good word. He was furious. Gritting his teeth, he slapped the chair in pain. If you had not left her in the diplomatic mission, would I have been tormented to the point of no return? Disguising her as a maid isn't a long-term solution. Besides, I don't think you need to chain her up. With you in this house, I don't think Miss Shen will be willing to go anywhere else. Fan Xian continued to provoke him with a smile. Then what can I do, sir? Yan Bingyun laughed coldly. That great princess of northern Qi is quite something. She has only been in the capital for a few days, and yet she can order the great prince to come to my manor and put pressure on me to treat Miss Shen well. She is Shen Zhong's daughter, a wanted criminal in the kingdom of Qi. Right now, I can neither kill her nor let her go. What can I do? The faint sound of weeping could be heard from the room. Fan Xian withdrew his gaze from the door. Only now did he realize that the great prince also knew of this matter. He frowned. If it is truly inconvenient, I will take Miss Shen back to my manor. Yan Bingyun suddenly raised his head. Fan Xian was strong and silent. After a long time, Yan Bingyun slowly nodded. After they left Yan Manor, they found that there was an additional carriage that had been transferred from Fan Manor. Fan Xian was no longer in the mood to take a walk in the rain. He sat in the carriage and turned his head to look at Miss Shen, whose face was full of fear. He smiled and comforted her. Don't worry, Miss Shen. Stay here for a few days. When things have calmed down, I will take you back to Yan Manor. He had investigated the matter of the second prince because of the death feud between him and the eldest princess. It was also because of some obscure reason that he would never say aloud. The matter was too big. If he did not have certain things in his hands, he would not dare to fully trust Yan Bingyun. Although trust was a matter of intuition and judgment, when it was not enough, it was more of a relationship of interest. The only thing that satisfied Fan Xian was that Miss Shen was in the manor, and he believed that Yan Bingyun would often come to the manor to talk to him. Yan Bingyun was deeply influenced by the culture of the Overwatch Council. Although he was secretly unhappy that Fan Xian had taken Lady Shen away, he did not feel too conflicted. After all, Lady Shen was a ticking time bomb to the Yan Manor. Although it had not exploded yet, it had already caused him and his son to quarrel endlessly every day. Now that Fan Xian had taken her back to the manor, on one hand, the two sides had reached an agreement to seek a balance of trust, and on the other hand, it was a temporary peace. Fan Xian looked out the window at the rainy street and sighed. He thought of a year ago, when he had also opened that chest on a rainy night. He thought of how crazy he had been that night, and then he thought of his own darkness and boredom. Only then did he realize that he had not yet had the time to change the world, but the world had already changed him deeply. As the carriage arrived at the entrance to Dengshi, the rain began to lessen. There were more people, and the carriage slowed down. It seemed to be a little crowded in front, and for a moment it could not move. At that moment, on the long street, which could only accommodate 3 carriages side by side, a carriage overtook them from behind, joining the carriage of Fan Manor. A plump arm with a light yellow sleeve reached out and lifted the curtain of Fan Xian's carriage. "Master!" she called out in surprise. Fan Xian had been watching for a long time. He raised his hand to signal Deng Ziyu, who had already drawn his knife, to stop. He looked over in surprise. He was surprised that after half a year, the man still remembered his master. In the carriage, Yi Linger opened her bright eyes wide and looked at Fan Xian and Lady Shen in shock. Covering her mouth, she said, "You are indeed worthy of being Linger's teacher. Which sister have you tricked?" Fan Xian scolded her unhappily. "You know I'm your master, but you don't know how to be respectful. You're about to become the second princess's wife. What are you doing out here in the rain?" Fan Xian had already begun to suspect the real role the second prince had played in the Nyolan Street murder. The second prince had invited him to the banquet. Although it was later discovered that Si Lily had sent the information to the eldest princess, and the scholar the eldest princess had planted in the prime minister's manor had secretly conspired with Wan Er's second brother, Fan Xian had never let down his guard against the second prince. After returning from his summer vacation by the lake, he had coincidentally met the crown prince. Someone who was used to scheming against others could not be very honorable. Everyone thought that the eldest princess supported the Eastern Palace, including Fan Xian. He had not thought of this at first, but now that he thought about it, with the eldest princess's perverted desire for power, why would she support a legitimate crown prince? What was the point? When Fan Xian and Crown Prince Jing, Li Hongqing, ate at Yisher Tavern, they unexpectedly discovered that Yisher Tavern's backer was the Cui family, and that the Cui family's backer was Xinyang. Although stringing together a few pearls could not prove anything, he firmly believed in his intuition. The second prince's silence was unusual, and he must have a powerful backer in the palace. And if the second prince really was in cahoots with the eldest princess, then Fan Xian could only say sorry. Although he had already begun to investigate the second prince, Fan Xian did not feel much resistance toward the girl in front of him, the girl who would become the second prince's wife next spring. He even hid the expression on his face very well. His first meeting with Yi Ling was not a pleasant one. Later, he used some petty tricks to fight the coffin breaker. But after their marriage, she often came to the manor to play with Wan. After a few interactions, Fan Xian began to admire this beautiful girl, whose eyes were as clear as jade. This was because she had a free and easy spirit that was different from that of the other daughters of noble families. But he couldn't stand Yi Linger calling him master in front of Wanner and sister. She made him seem older than he was. In the carriage, Yi Linger said excitedly, "Teacher, why don't you come play with me when you're back?" "Teacher, where are you going?" "Teacher," Fan Xian rubbed his temples, listening to the string of words. He smiled bitterly and sighed. "Wukong, you're being naughty again." Chapter 268. Fan Xian had taught Yi Linger a few tricks by the lake. In reality, he had secretly learned the Yi family's coffin breaker technique. Yet, she had called her master from last year to today. This fact made him feel both funny and happy. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to your manor to see Wanner," replied Yi Linger. After saying this, she looked at Miss Shen, who was standing next to him. She snorted and said nothing. What Fan Xian disliked the most was the sliver of arrogance in her bones, the way she judged others purely by her own judgment. He was silent and did not reply. He put on the airs of a master, but Yi Linger liked it. After a year together, she knew that Fan Xian was someone who cared about details. She smiled. "Don't be angry. I know you're a popular person in the Overwatch Council. Even if you wanted to keep a mistress in your house, you wouldn't have brought her to the street." Fan Xian smiled and said nothing. At that moment, the crowd ahead seemed to have eased. The Yi family's carriage was the first to move forward, but it stopped there. It seemed that Yi Linger had found something interesting to watch. Fan Xian waved for the carriage to move forward. When they reached the Yi family carriage, he stepped down in his raincoat. Deng Ziyu and the other members of the Qinian unit quickly followed. In the carriage, Yi Linger saw them wearing the gray raincoat and walking in the rain. Only then did she realize that Fan Xian was not passing through Dengshiku. He had come specifically to do something. Dai Zhen of the Vegetable Inspection Department at Dengshiku had to wait for his subordinates to bring in the vegetables and fruits from outside the city. He would then classify them and sell them in different markets. At the same time, he had to deal with the daily meals of the internal court and the manners of the nobles. To be more accurate, he was the chef of the Qin kingdom's nobles. However, the scope of his chores was rather broad. A stalk of celery was not worth much, but 100 stalks of celery were worth some money. A chicken was not worth much, but 100 chickens were enough to exchange for a good banquet at Esher House. The Vegetable Inspection Department was not a yamen. It had no rank or rank. Because there were too many places to serve, there was not even a direct yamen. Perhaps it was because the officials felt that there was nothing to be gained from sending vegetables to the capital, so they did not pay much attention to it. In reality, Fan Xian knew that the appearance of this phenomenon had something to do with the new policies that were sometimes implemented and sometimes abandoned halfway. The emperor was playing around blindly, so the organization below was also very chaotic and redundant. As the chief officer of the Produce Inspection Department, Dai Jin had been steadily earning money from eggs and vegetables all these years. He thought that he was the only one who knew how many benefits were hidden in these unremarkable things. He often hid in his bed in the middle of the night and laughed secretly. Even when his most beloved concubine urged him to go to his uncle every day to ask for a proper official position, he refused. Beautiful! I'm the first person in history to be able to sell vegetables to this extent. Dai Jin couldn't help praising himself in his heart. But today, he could not be beautiful, nor could he smile. In this autumn rain, the officials of the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council directly sealed his pitifully small yamen and blocked the accounts room of Datong Square. Datong Square was full of vegetable sellers, and a third of the capital's daily vegetables were supplied here. With an ashen face, he rushed to the accounts room and looked at the black-clothed ghosts inside. He patted his cheeks to make his smile seem gentler. So it's the officials of the First Bureau. I was just thinking that since it's late in the autumn, there are some rare fruits in the square. One day I'll have to go show my filial piety. The leader of the First Bureau's investigation today was Mu Feng. He knew that today's operation was a demonstration that Commissioner Fan wanted to make in the capital, so he did not dare to be careless. He looked at Dai Jin coldly and said, "Master Dai, come with us." The officials of the First Bureau had already sealed the account books with familiarity and began to use the names in the register to point out the people in the square and lock them into the carriages outside. The autumn rain was still falling, and Dai Jin's heart grew colder. He smiled apologetically and said, "I wouldn't dare to call myself master. Perhaps Master Mu has misunderstood something." He habitually stuffed a banknote into Mu Feng-er's sleeve. Mu Feng-er looked at him and felt pity for him. Had he not even heard of Commissioner Fan leading the First Bureau? Two indifferent Overwatch Council officials stepped forward and unceremoniously kicked Dai Jin in the back of his knees, knocking him to the ground. They took out a secret rope from behind their waists and tied a difficult-to-untie knot around Dai Jin's hands. Their movements were unusually clean and efficient. Presumably, the First Bureau had done this many times in the past. Dai Jin fell to the ground. His mind was in chaos. His wrists were in pain, and he was both embarrassed and angry. Finally, he couldn't help but curse. "What are you doing?" Mu Feng-er touched the instrument in his clothes and thought for a moment. He still did not take it out. "We are here to investigate a case. Master Dai, please cooperate." Dai Jin panicked. He rolled his eyes and yelled, "Help! The Overwatch Council is murdering for money." When the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council charged into the Produce Inspection Department, the people of Qing, who loved to watch a good show, had already surrounded them. However, they feared the thick black of the Overwatch Council, so the people did not dare get too close. Seeing the usually arrogant Master Dai in such a wretched state, they felt anxious. The thugs that Dai Jin had secretly kept took advantage of the commotion and blocked the path of the Overwatch Council. Dai Jin's hands were tied, but his mind was moving quickly. He knew that when the Overwatch Council acted, there was no reason to hold back. He yelled with all his might, "The Overwatch Council is murdering for money." In reality, he was also panicking. At the moment, he could not think of anything. He could only blindly yell the words, "murdering for money," hoping that his uncle in the palace would receive the news as soon as possible and think of a way to get him out before the Overwatch Council threw him into that terrifying prison. Seeing the excited crowd surround them, Mu Feng furrowed his brows. He took out a document from his clothes and read Daijin's crimes to the crowd. Most of the hard laborers and commoners in the capital deeply trusted the officials. After all, everyone knew that Daijin's hands and feet were not clean. But the crowd had surrounded them, and it was not easy to retreat. The First Bureau had very few people today, and they had to bring account books and related witnesses. It was inevitable that they would be in a difficult position. Seeing this, Mu Feng-er's heart was filled with anger. From a distance, he glanced outside the crowd of onlookers. Next to two carriages, there were a few unfamiliar colleagues of the Overwatch Council in raincoats surrounding Commissioner Fan. They were coldly watching through the rain. Mu Feng-er panicked and yelled, "Let's go!" Daijin's hands were tied, but he knew that the Overwatch Council's hell was not a place an official could go. His face was red, and his voice was hoarse from crying. Like a child, he desperately sat on the ground and refused to go down. His confidants also surrounded them. Although they did not dare to make a move against the Overwatch Council, they forcefully prevented Mu Feng-er from capturing Fan Xian. In the rain, Fan Xian looked coldly at the scene up and down the stone steps not far away. In his heart, he thought that Mu Feng-er could not be put in an important position. Then he heard Yi Ling-er's curious voice from the carriage behind him. "Teacher, the way the Overwatch Council is doing things is a bit absurd. In broad daylight, you're pulling and pulling with a minor official. What a scandal! If the commoners see this, where will the court put its face?" Raindrops hit the brim of Fan Xian's hat, making it lower and covering half of his face. "Officials don't want face, so the court doesn't have to give them face," he calmly said. "Ling-er, don't look at this minor official. In a year, he can take more than 5,000 liang of silver from the palace. As for the benefits he's taken from Datong Lane over the years, it's even more incalculable." Half of Yi Ling-er's body was leaning against the carriage window. The rain had soaked a lock of hair on her forehead, and her clear eyes were full of interest. Today, she had gone to Fan Manor to have fun. She hadn't expected to meet Fan Xian on the road, and she had followed him to watch the spectacle. Only now did she realize that such a minor official could take so much money. At this moment, Mu-er and his men had finally fought their way out of the produce inspectorate and arrived in front of Fan Xian. Daijin had been dragged by them through the rain. It was a miserable sight. The thugs also surrounded them, but they seemed to be able to see the power and influence these two carriages represented, so they did not dare to act rashly. As for the commoners of the capital, they looked at Fan Xian and Deng Ziyu's attire, and seemed to be able to feel the coldness emanating from these people in raincoats, so they unconsciously retreated a little further away. Daijin was truly a shrewish minor official. His official robes had long been soaked in dirty water, and his hair was scattered across his slightly round face. He looked battered and exhausted, but he still fiercely scolded, "You Overwatch Council people eat and drink from us. Haven't you taken enough? You want to take me back to torture me for money again." When the ignorant commoners heard him say this, they couldn't help but look as if they had suddenly understood. Fan Xian slightly lowered his eyelids and looked at the official in front of him, who was sprawled in the rain and kicking his legs like a pig on the verge of death. He was not in a hurry to seal his mouth, because the Overwatch Council in the hearts of the world's people had long ago formed an incomparably dark image. Even if Daijin cursed a few more times, it would not affect the overall situation. And today, he was only beating a small cat. The key was that he wanted to see how capable his subordinates were. Looking at Mu Feng-er, who was in front of him with a face full of guilt and a trace of anger, Fan Xian shook his head and asked, "Why didn't you choose to go to his house in the middle of the night and take him? Although it's raining today, you know that there are many people in Datong Square. It's easy for trouble to happen. Mu Feng-er was startled. In the new regulations, it was written very clearly that in the future, cases should be handled in the open as much as possible. That's why he had chosen to go to the Yamen to arrest people. He wanted to do it beautifully and make a name for himself. If it had been before, if the Overwatch Council really wanted to arrest an official, of course, it would have been in the middle of the night. They would have gone to his house and taken him away. How did this become his fault again? Fan Xian didn't wait for him to explain. Even if you wanted to come during the day, you could have sealed the accounts room and left immediately. Given your methods, could you not have allowed Daijin to return to the council quietly? What use are you keeping those methods? What crimes do you still have to recite? Do you think you're an official of the Supreme Court? Do I have to specially hire a scholar to follow you and proclaim the sacred religion? Hearing these sharp and piercing words, Mu Feng-er repeatedly complained. On one hand, Daijin's backing was indeed strong enough. If he used his methods recklessly, he was afraid there would be trouble in the future. On the other hand, he was also worried that the commissioner was a great scholar and might not be able to see them do such shady work. Hearing Fan Xian's sarcasm, he realized that although the commissioner had the reputation of being an immortal poet, it seemed that he was not opposed to the Overwatch Council's shady methods. In fact, he seemed to be even more passionate about them than Mu Feng-er was. At this time, Daijin was still lying in the rain and crying. His muddy eyes saw who Mu Feng-er was reporting to. He knew it was someone from the Overwatch Council, and he couldn't help but feel afraid. He didn't recognize Fan Xian, but he recognized Yi Ling-er in the carriage behind him. Yi Ling-er was the only daughter of the capital's garrison. Ever since she was a child, she had liked to ride horses on the streets of the capital. There were not many people in the capital who didn't know her. Daijin immediately cried to the woman in the carriage. "Miss Yi, please help me." Yi Ling-er looked at Fan Xian's calm and somewhat strange expression. She didn't dare say anything. She pulled her head back. Daijin knew that day was over. He finally used his trump card. In a loud voice, he shouted, "Do you know who my uncle is? How dare you arrest me? My uncle is, oh!" Seeing Fan Xian's look, Deng Ziyu knew that he didn't want to hear Eunuch Dai's name. He raised his knife and slapped it across Daijin's mouth. Only now did Mu Feng-er understand. With some shame, he took out a small wooden stick with two ends attached to a rope and roughly shoved it into Daijin's mouth. The wooden stick was very hard, and it broke the corners of Daijin's mouth. 2 streaks of blood flowed down. Naturally, he couldn't speak. The crowd around them cried out in alarm. Fan Xian turned a deaf ear to them. He only said to Mu Feng-er, "I don't care who his uncle is. I only care who your uncle is. Do your job well and don't embarrass Mu Tai." Mu Feng-er made a sound of shameful acknowledgement. He threw Daijin, whose face was covered in blood, back into the carriage. He turned around and led his subordinates to capture a few thugs hidden among the crowd. They didn't give them any chance to resist. They used the iron rods that were commonly used in the council and viciously smashed them to the ground. Seeing this, the crowd was fearful. They scattered in all directions, but they stopped at the corner of the street and looked back curiously. In the midst of the torrential rain, a few Overwatch Council spies in raincoats were waving sticks and beating the thugs on the ground with dark expressions. Perhaps it was because of the power of the Overwatch Council over the years, but the thugs didn't dare to fight back. The scene was bloody. Fan Xian looked at the crowd in the distance and shook his head imperceptibly. Surprisingly, he didn't return to his carriage. Instead, he lifted his hat and went straight into Yi Ling-er's carriage. Yi Ling-er was startled. How could a man like him get into her carriage? Fan Xian pretended not to realize this. He looked at Yi Ling-er's slightly wet hair and paused. He took out a handkerchief and handed it to her. Yi Ling took it and wiped her wet hair. Smelling the faint fragrance on the handkerchief, she thought it was Wan Er's. She smiled and began to ask what had happened earlier. Fan Xian laughed bitterly and told her what Daijin had done. Yi Ling asked curiously, "How could such a small matter be worthy of your personal attention?" Fan Xian laughed coldly. "The waters of the capital are deep. Don't think that Daijin is just an official in charge of selling vegetables. He's quite greedy. The reason he's so daring is because he has a good backer. His uncle is Eunuch Dai of the palace. I'm here today to keep watch. I'm afraid my subordinates will act too slowly and alarm Eunuch Dai. If I don't act, the First Bureau won't be able to do anything to the people in the palace." Yi Ling opened her bright eyes wide. "Father once said that matters in the palace are the most complicated. He told me and my brother to stay out of it. Master, you're quite daring." "He's just a eunuch." Fan Xian laughed. "Eunuchs have no human rights," he thought. Yi Ling shook her head disapprovingly. "Don't underestimate the eunuchs in the palace. They have their own masters. If you embarrass them, you'll be disrespecting the concubines in the palace." Fan Xian was slightly taken aback. It seemed that he had only just thought of this problem. After a moment, his face returned to a sunny smile. "What's there to be afraid of? I don't like Wan going to the palace as a lobbyist. If the concubines make trouble for me, as a fake son-in-law, the worst that can happen is that I'll be punished by the palace." Yi Ling tilted her head slightly. She looked at this fearless fellow, and it was impossible to tell what she was thinking. The carriage arrived at the main gate of Fan Manor, and the two of them got off. Ting Zijing was already waiting outside. Fan Xian told him to have his wife take care of Miss Shen in a house in the back street, and then he led Yi Ling into the manor. He didn't forget to ask for the handkerchief in Yi Ling-er's hand. The handkerchief had been stolen from Haitang, and Fan Xian couldn't bear to give it away. Eunuch Dai was Consort Shu's favorite in the palace, and Yi Ling was about to become the second imperial concubine. This meant that Consort Shu was Yi Ling-er's future mother-in-law, and Yi Ling-er was about to become Eunuch Dai's half-master. Fan Xian had chatted with Yi Ling earlier for the sake of this relationship. He couldn't bear to give her the handkerchief, but he had to use it wherever he could. The rain continued to fall in the capital all day, and at dusk it finally lessened. Eunuch Dai, who had received the news, rushed out of the palace, flustered and exasperated. He was a popular figure in the palace, and because Consort Shu's literary talent was exceptional, she often helped the emperor copy some speeches. Even as Consort Shu's personal attendant, he also had the task of delivering imperial edicts to various manors. For example, when Fan Xian had first received the title of functionary of Taichung Temple, it had been this Eunuch Dai who had delivered the edict. By delivering edicts to various manors, he had naturally received many benefits. Now that he had broken the rules and entered the palace, no one dared to say a word. Eunuch Dai stood at the entrance of the produce inspectorate, his face bright red. He looked at the mess inside and heard the cries of pain coming from the people around him. He couldn't help but feel angry. Pointing at his nephew's subordinates, he yelled, "I told you a long time ago. You can ignore the other yamens in the capital, but the Overwatch Council must be fawned over." One of the men covered his swollen cheek and cried, "My ancestor, we've given them a lot of benefits. Today, I even gave them a banknote, and the official of the First Bureau accepted it. Who would have thought that they would copy it without error?" Eunuch Dai's entire body shook with anger. In a sharp voice he yelled, "Who dared to not give me face? Which little bastard led the team? I'm going to find that black-faced Mu Tai. How dare he touch the Dai family's seedling?" He was a palace eunuch, and the Overwatch Council had no control over him, so he had the right to say such things. In his anger, he took his sedan chair to the First Bureau to demand Daijin's return. Although his nephew, Daijin, was a good-for-nothing, he had still sent over a lot of silver every year. He couldn't just watch as the Overwatch Council tortured him until he was half dead. In the capital's bureaucracy, who didn't know that the Overwatch Council was a place like that? Even if you made it out alive, you'd probably be missing a few parts. The sedan chair arrived at the entrance of a yamen, but Eunuch Dai was suspicious. He first had his attendant go in and make some inquiries. Not long after, the attendant came out and whispered something in his ear. Eunuch Dai's face immediately changed. After lingering for a long time, he gritted his teeth and said, "Return to the palace." The injured thug saw that the old man's sedan chair was returning to the palace, and he panicked. Ignoring the fact that he was at the entrance of the first bureau, he shouted, "Old master, you must uphold justice for us." Eunuch Dai was indeed a man born in Jiangxia. His experience of announcing imperial edicts had trained him to be a master of speech. He spat out a mouthful of phlegm and spat it right onto the man's face. In a trembling voice he cursed, "I'm Eunuch Dai, not justice." Having said this, he nestled back into the sedan chair, feeling very uneasy. His attendant had asked around earlier, and the person who was personally leading the team today was Sir Fan Jr. Eunuch Dai now remembered that the Emperor had already given the first bureau to Commissioner Fan. But why did this Sir Fan Jr. take a liking to his nephew? Eunuch Dai knew that even if his nephew was greedy, compared to the officials of the capital, he was still nothing but an ant. How could he have guessed that Fan Xian, who only wanted to train soldiers and open a business, would think of him? Thinking of the Fan family's overwhelming power, Eunuch Dai couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. Daijin's thug watched the small sedan chair leave in a cloud of dust, and stupidly wiped the disgusting spittle from his face. He still didn't understand who Eunuch Dai was afraid of. A few days later, Eunuch Dai found an opportunity to bring up the matter in front of Lady Shu, hoping to get his nephew out of trouble and also to get some information. Unexpectedly, Lady Shu had somehow found out about this beforehand, and knew exactly what his nephew Daijin had done. Angry, she harshly chastised him. Only now did Eunuch Dai realize that Sir Fan Jr. had already used some means to cut off his escape route. In his shock and fear, he finally cast aside his old face and humbly went to Yi Guiping's palace to curry favor. Only then did he use Lady Lu's connections to quietly hand over a thin silver note to Fan Manor. On the other side, Mu Feng who was in charge of the case, was also scratching his head. He looked at Daijin, who had not been transferred to the celestial prison, and felt a burst of anger in his heart. It was this scoundrel who had caused him to lose face in front of Commissioner Fan, but Commissioner Fan had ordered that this minor character should not be punished. Why? His hand touched the rich silver note that had just been issued to him, and he couldn't help but mutter to himself. Chapter 269. Fan Xian had ordered the first bureau to arrest Daijin precisely because he had the head eunuch behind him. The officials in the capital discovered that even Eunuch Dai had succumbed, and they were naturally intimidated by the determination of the first bureau and Fan Xian's methods. The first bureau's work was carried out in the capital in an orderly and secretive manner. In accordance with the rules of previous years, they broke down doors in the dark and quietly escorted the officials back to the council. The sudden purge brought a chill to the capital. The officials in the capital thought that this great scholar was going to stir up a storm in the capital, just like the case in the spring. But gradually people discovered that this was not the case. The officials investigated in this storm were all of relatively low rank. There were no important figures in the various factions, and there were no major cases that involved a lot of people. The elders of the court and the subordinates of the various princes, for Fan Xian's sake, and having learned from Eunuch Dai's mistakes, did not react violently. As time passed, they discovered that this storm did not touch on the important parts of the bureaucracy, and that there were only a few minor incidents. The officials, who had been a little nervous, relaxed. They guessed that Fan Xian was just a new official, and was using these 3 fires to establish his authority. Although the fire was not large, there were still people who were worried about being caught up in it. So in the past few days, Lady Lu had become the busiest person in Fan Manor. Her pair of hands, which usually liked to hand out banknotes without the slightest bit of emotion, now began to collect the banknotes with great compassion. Naturally, these banknotes were all transferred to Fan Xian. Fan Xian distributed most of them to the bureau, and sent the rest to Yen Manor. From ancient times until now, from Fan Shen's world to Fan Xian's world, money had always been the ultimate tool to win over people's hearts and pacify them. So the employees of the first bureau of the Overwatch Council were much more motivated, and the officials who had succeeded in intimate contact with the wife of the minister also felt a lot more at ease. Those who gave money, those who received it, they all comforted themselves. The affairs were already on the right track, so Fan Xian did not go to Xinfeng restaurant today. Instead, he sat in his study and flipped through the files in his hand. The files had been compiled by Mu Tai. Although the writing was not exquisite, it was clear. After paying a large fine, Eunuch Dai's nephew was lucky enough to return unscathed from the Overwatch Council. Taking advantage of a loophole in Qing law, he was not moved to the Ministry of Justice or the Supreme Court. However, he could no longer be a minor official in the Produce Inspection Bureau. The other small cases were handled more gently. Logically speaking, since the Overwatch Council was investigating the Produce Inspection Bureau case, Daijin would not only lose his official position, but he would also lose his head. But Fan Xian somewhat appreciated Eunuch Dai's knowledge and tactfulness. He had saved him some trouble in the future, and Yi Ling had silently entered the palace to speak up for him. She had also passed on concubine Shu's plea for leniency. This was a favor he had to sell. Shi Chanli looked at his young teacher across the desk and felt a little uneasy. After the spring examinations, his 3 good friends, Ho Jichang, Yang Wanli, and Qing Shilin, had been sent out to become officials. According to the letters, they were doing well in various counties and provinces. Prime Minister Lin had been in the court for many years, so naturally he had connections all over the counties and provinces. These people all had their eyes on Fan Xian, and as for Fan Xian's 3 prize students, they naturally had to be taken care of. Of the 4, only Shi Chanli did not have a name on the list, so he could not immediately embark on an official career. Before Fan Xian left for northern Qi, he left a letter for Shi Chanli to wait for his return. Unexpectedly, after Fan Xian returned, he immediately took over the affairs of the first bureau of the Overwatch Council. Shi Chanli was not sure what he could do to help his teacher. His friend had already become a ruler of a region, while he himself could only sit in his study and transcribe files. Even though he was an easygoing person, he could not help but feel sad. Fan Xian raised his head and glanced at him. With a smile, he said, "Do you think it's too stuffy?" Shi Chanli smiled bitterly. "Teacher, you are a few years younger than me, and yet you can be so calm in the midst of complicated documents. It seems that I also need to sharpen my temperament." Fan Xian chuckled. If Ho Jichang were here, he would certainly stand up and reply. If it was Yang Wanli, perhaps he would have already been unable to suppress his curiosity and begun to question why Fan Xian had released a felon. Only Shi Chanli was not impatient, nor did he have a dull tongue. It seemed that Fan Xian's decision to keep him by his side had not been a mistake. "Don't call me teacher," he said. "I'd rather you call me sir. It's not that it's too official, but it feels a little absurd." Shi Chanli was stunned. In fact, it was very common for examinees to be younger than the examiners. He did not feel that there was anything wrong with it. Fan Xian handed over the files on the table. "What do you think?" he asked. Shi Chanli did not know whether or not Fan Xian was testing him, but he had memorized these documents in the past 2 days. He shook his head and said sincerely, I really do not understand, teacher, what you mean by this. If you really wanted to fight a tiger, you wouldn't have to keep an eye on these mice. Fan Xian smiled. I just wanted to find something for the cats of the first bureau to do. Familiarize themselves with it, so that when we do something big in the future, they won't be so flustered. Sir Chomley pretended not to hear the word big and sincerely asked for guidance. Sir, as an official in the court, I naturally have to share His Majesty's worries and work for the court. But looking at your actions these past few days, although you have caught the small and the big, you have still offended some people. Offending people is a characteristic of the Overwatch Council. Fan Xian explained. You also know that the Overwatch Council is His Majesty's private organization. It is not a true public tool, but His Majesty's private tool. We only have one person we are loyal to, so whether it is from the perspective of the palace or the Overwatch Council, we must play the role of offending people. And the first bureau is deep in the capital. Being hindered by the prosperity of the capital, it has completely lost His Majesty's original intention. It is not valiant enough, not sinister enough. His Majesty put me in charge of the First Bureau because he wants the First Bureau to return to its original role of offending people. Sir Chomley could no longer pretend. His teacher had already explained everything to him. He could only answer honestly. His Majesty wants you to be a lonely official. Fan Xian nodded. I am not biased. His Majesty wants me to be a second Shen Pingping, but... His tone changed, and he said with a hint of mockery, I went to visit the director's manor. The manor is extravagant and luxurious, but that loneliness is carved into the bones. I do not like it. Sir Chomley immediately understood what he meant. He said worriedly, but if you feign civility, His Majesty's eyes are like torches. He can see clearly. I am afraid it will not be good for your future. Fan Xian smiled and did not say anything. He thought that under normal circumstances, the Emperor would not have thoughts more poisonous than a tiger's. Sir Chomley understood that he had said too much, so he changed the subject. The First Bureau is investigating now. Although they have reverted to their tradition of arresting people at night, the First Bureau has refused to cover up the news. If anyone asks, they will tell them the truth. I do not agree. Fan Xian asked with interest, why? Sir Chomley thought for a moment and said, the Overwatch Council is His Majesty's secret organization. The reason it can intimidate the officials, other than the special privileges established by Qing law, is because of its sense of mystery and darkness. People are ignorant. The more they don't understand something, the more afraid they are. Now that you have purposely put the First Bureau's actions on the table, I am afraid it will weaken this feeling and cause the people of the court to look down on the Overwatch Council. Fan Xian admitted that what Sir Chomley said made sense, but he still said, I know you do not agree with some of the clauses in the new regulations of the First Bureau, such as releasing information. I also admit that if the Overwatch Council continues to maintain the image of a man-eating demon in the dark, it will be very convenient for us to do things. Sir Chomley was surprised that his teacher would agree with him. He wondered if Fan Xian did not want the people of the world to see him as a monster? Did he want to change their image? What Fan Xian said next immediately overthrew his imagination. I do not care what the people of the world think of the Overwatch Council, but you must understand that I am only in charge of the First Bureau, not the entire council. The First Bureau is located in the capital. Other than the secret agents in the manors of the nobles, there is no way to hide anything. The officials of the capital are as numerous as the swimming carp, and there are countless connections between them. Since there is no way to maintain the mystery of the First Bureau, then I might as well do it openly. Perhaps it will be more of a deterrent. He then said seriously, however, I only want the results of the investigation to be presented in the light. I don't expect the process to be the same. I can accept any dark means used in the middle. You should know that I don't want to be a saint. Sir Cholmondeley nodded, feeling very comforted. It seemed that his teacher was indeed someone who dared to expose the corruption of the bureaucracy, but was temporarily holding back. Fan Xian looked at him, not knowing what Sir Cholmondeley thought of him. He said, "From today onwards, for every case investigated by the First Bureau, after the case has been closed and sent to the Supreme Court or the Ministry of Justice, you must write a report detailing the cause of the case and so on. Then you must make an announcement. I have already chosen a place to put up the announcement. It will be on the wall between the First Bureau and the Supreme Court." Sir Cholmondeley was dumbfounded. This is against the rules. It is not the Ministry of Justice that issues the wanted posters, nor is it the court that issues the list. The Overwatch Council also has to make an announcement? Fan Xian said unhappily, "Not the Overwatch Council, but the First Bureau. Didn't I say earlier that it had to be more open? Are you going to make me write a novel and sell it everywhere?" Sir Cholmondeley immediately replied with joy, "That would be best. It can solve the confusion of the people, and it can also slightly maintain the feeling that the First Bureau is not close to strangers, and you have opened a bookstore, so it is most convenient." Fan Xian exhaled in anger and stood up to leave. Sir Cholmondeley carefully followed behind him. Finally, he couldn't help but ask, "Teacher, does this mean that I will start working in the Overwatch Council?" Fan Xian sighed. He knew that the scholars of the world did not want to enter the sinister and shameless Secret Service. He patted Sir Cholmondeley on the shoulder and said, "You are my private secretary. I will speak to my father and temporarily hang you in the Ministry of Revenue. We will discuss this another day. Don't worry, no one will point at your back and call you a dog of the Overwatch Council." Walking through the astonishingly large garden in the back of Fan Manor, Fan Xian frowned. Using dark methods to achieve a bright result? He didn't think of himself as a saint who would let himself be wronged. Although he was very willing to do things for the people of the Kingdom of Qing, such as slightly curbing the corrupt atmosphere in the officialdom, and at least ensuring that the dam in the south would not collapse so quickly, the rectification of the First Bureau was more out of his own selfishness. Although he had the title of immortal poet, and now he had the secret praise of a new generation of literary leaders, when he clashed with the dark filth that had accumulated in the Overwatch Council for 20 years, his reputation would always be somewhat damaged. So he wanted to make the First Bureau brighter, because a good reputation would help him greatly in the future. Thinking of the words about darkness and light, he couldn't help but think of when he was chatting with Hai Dang in northern Qi. She said, "The dark night gave me black eyes, but I will use them to roll my eyes at the world." He couldn't help but worry about the situation in the north. He didn't know if Haitang would be able to properly arrange the matter he had entrusted to her. Uncle Wu Zhu was still playing missing, and there was no news of Ku He returning to Shangjing. Far away in the garden, a few girls were chatting. It was a sunny day, and the grasshoppers were hopping around in the grass after autumn. The cicadas in the trees took advantage of the last moments of their lives to call out with all their might, drowning out the voices of the girls. De Bao was catching ants by the courtyard wall. Fan Xizha was not at school, but he was not at home either. Fan Xian squinted and saw that Yi Ling had come again today. He couldn't help but secretly groan. That girl thought she had done Fan Xian a great favor, and these days she had been coming to the manor to play. When he saw that the shy princess Ro Jia sitting next to Yi Ling, he felt even more bitter. A 12-year-old girl had become a 13-year-old, but she was still a girl, and Fan Xian didn't want to be stared at with adoration. Recently, he had refused Li Hongqing's invitations to dinner many times. Before Yan Bingyun's investigation was complete, he had to hide. And today, he had to hide from Ro Jia, the little girl who had secretly expressed her love for him. Circulating the zhenqi in his body, Sir Fan's body lightened. He demonstrated the lightness he had learned from the shadows of the staff. He flew over the yellow grass and quietly leaped out of the manor. Arriving at Shenzhen Road in Jingdo, the manor that Wang Qinian had bought for 120 liang of silver, Fan Xian sat in the innermost room and stretched comfortably. This was his most secretive nest. Other than the Qinian unit and Chen Pingping, not even his family knew that he often conducted official and private business here. Deng Ziyu's expression was solemn as he placed the 2 bamboo tubes on the table and retreated. He knew that he did not have the commissioner's trust as Wang Qinian did, so he consciously left the room. The color of the bamboo tubes was very similar. Perhaps they were both produced at the foot of Yan Mountain near Shangjing. The wax used to seal the tubes was also very similar. They were both intact and probably untouched. Only the secret markings on the bamboo joints let the secret agents of the Overwatch Council in charge of transmitting intelligence know that these 2 extremely secretive letters belonged to 2 separate routes in the northern system. Fan Xian picked up the bamboo tube. The first thing he did was to confirm that no one had opened it. Wang Qinian's calligraphy on the wax had the charm of Pan Ling. It was indeed not easy to fake. Only then did he relax and open the bamboo tube, taking out the 2 letters inside. One letter was from Si Lily, and the other was from Haitang. To make it easier to communicate with Haitang, Fan Xian had set up a special line of communication for her. Si Lily did not send any important intelligence. Although she had already followed Fan Xian and Haitang's plan and converted to Tianyi Dao, her efforts to enter the palace had not yet yielded any result. In Shangjing, Shenzhong's family had been destroyed. Other than dealing a heavy blow to the Empress's power, there was not much of a reaction. Shang Shanhu had also been confined to his home. At the end of the letter, it was said that the imperial advisor of Northern Qi, Ku He, had returned to Shangjing and had been in seclusion. Although no one dared to suspect anything, Si Lily was convinced that the peerless master must have been injured. Fan Xian smiled. In this world, there were only 2 or 3 great grandmasters who could fight with that man-eating monster, Ku He. In Haitang's letter, there was not even half a word about that great grandmaster. He and Haitang had a mutually beneficial relationship, so naturally, he did not expect her to say anything. He was only concerned about whether or not the auspicious sign had been properly arranged. After some thought, he began to write back, urging Haitang to fulfill her promise. For Haitang, this was just a matter of convenience, but for Fan Xian, it was of great importance. In his reply to Si Lily, he only copied a small poem from Li Qingzhao as a consolation, and did not say anything else. In the days that he had been dealing with the First Bureau, Fan Xian had been thinking about the issue of Ruoro and Li Hongqing's marriage. This matter had nothing to do with the Crown Prince's character, or whether or not there was a conflict of political standpoints between the 2. For Fan Xian, the most important thing was one thing. Did his sister like it? Ruoro had already made her stance clear. She didn't like it. Fan Xian, like all older brothers, was confused and angry at girls in their puberty. He thought to himself, "Are you not going to marry?" But more than that, he wanted to protect her. Since his sister didn't like it, he had to break up the marriage. It was simple. This was no small matter. In fact, it could be said to be the most troublesome thing Fan Xian had encountered since coming to the capital from Danzhou. The emperor had appointed a marriage, and the 2 families were well matched. There was no reason to obstruct this marriage. So there were only 2 ways to proceed. First, keep an eye on the second prince and be ready to destroy him at any moment, dragging Li Hongqing down. When that time came, he could ask to break off the marriage. Second, start with Ruoro. Give her a benefit that even the emperor could not ignore, and temporarily keep her away from the capital. The first method, who knew how much of a ruckus it would cause, and the second method was too vague. Even Fan Xian himself had no confidence in it. They say that a general success is built on the bones of 10,000 people. Do I have to create a marriage to break the bones of 10,000 people? He laughed self-deprecatingly. If that didn't work out, he would have to trouble Uncle Wu Zhu to take Ruoro on a journey to the ends of the earth. Presumably, His Majesty would not actually execute the entire Fan family because of this. Chapter 270. Returning to the manor, Yi Linger and Princess Ro Jia had already returned. Fan Xian returned to his room and called for Siki to pour tea. He sent away the serving girl, who, like Cece, had been complaining about him in the autumn. Taking advantage of the fact that there was only him and his wife in the room, he quietly asked, "Has there been any news in the palace?" Lin Wanner was sitting by the window, embroidering something against the light outside. Hearing his question, she raised her head in surprise. "What has happened?" It was close to dusk, and the light from the sky shone in through the window. Fan Xian looked at Wanner's tightly furrowed brows, and his heart ached as he walked forward. He rubbed her smooth brows and said, "The light is not good. What are you embroidering?" Wanner's face was a bit pale. Perhaps it was because she had not slept well last night. She lowered her head and giggled. She hid what she was embroidering behind her back and said, "I'll show you when I'm done." Fan Xian looked at his wife's weak appearance and long eyelashes. He couldn't help but feel a glimmer of guilt. Ever since he had left Jingdo at the beginning of spring, his care for his wife had been weaker than it had been last year. This was not to say that he was someone who liked the new and hated the old. After all, the great Sir Fan Jr. did not even have a concubine. It was just that there were too many things holding him back, and he rarely paid attention to family matters. Lin Wanner thought of what he had asked earlier. She thought for a moment and then said, "The palace has been quiet recently. There is nothing special. Why would you ask this?" Fan Xian smiled bitterly. "Your heartless uncle sent me to manage the first bureau. I don't know how many officials I will offend. The true masters of those officials all live in the palace. Naturally, I have to pay more attention." Lin Wanner's identity was special. She had the royal grandmother's favor and the emperor's favor. Her position in the palace was even higher than Fan Xian had imagined. The emperor did not have a daughter. Presently, Qing Kingdom did not have a proper princess. Wanner was not much different from a princess. She thought for a moment and then smiled. "Don't worry. We all know the emperor favors you. Those ladies will only say good things about you in front of you." Fan Xian smiled and said, "I've only seen the emperor a few times. I don't know where the word favor comes from. If it's said that the emperor favors you, then it's possible. As for me, it's just love me, love my dog." A trace of adoration flashed through Lin Wanner's eyes. "Husband is always like this," she continued. "Shu Guifei has been full of praise for you these days. As for Yi Guipin, you also know that she is a relative of our family. No matter what, she has to side with you. It's just that the Empress is as quiet and indifferent as usual. As for the other concubines, they don't even have the right to speak in the palace, so I haven't remembered them." Fan Xian trusted his wife's judgment. Even if he took over the Overwatch Council in the future, the royal palace was still a place that his fingers could not touch. And Wanner was his most reliable spy and spy. Lady Shu had said good things about him because he had done her a favor. A few words didn't cost him much money. "What did Lady Ning say?" Fan Xian asked curiously. "News of me and your great brother fighting over the road should have reached the palace a long time ago." Lin Wanner covered her mouth and laughed. "Lady Ning can't be bothered with you. She has always loved me the most. She said that you and the great prince are two brats messing around. In the future, she will beat you 50 times. Fan Xian pretended to be alarmed. "My wife. The beatings in the palace are not pleasant. You have to help me put in a few good words." Lin Wanner was too lazy to respond to his naughty joke. She spat and said, "You like to offend people, and for no reason, you always want me to clean up after you." She took out the tight embroidery from behind her and giggled. You have nothing to ask, Commissioner? Then please leave. Don't disturb me. Fan Xian pulled back his hand that was about to grab her hand. I don't know what it is, he said gloomily. Just as he was about to leave, he remembered the important person he had forgotten. With a trace of hesitation, he asked, Did you see the Empress Dowager? Lin Wanner's hand paused. A moment later, she raised her head. There was confusion and sadness in her eyes. She nodded. I saw her. Grandmother didn't say anything. The Empress Dowager, who had always lived deep in the palace, was in reality the true ruler of the entire palace. Strangely, Fan Xian had entered the palace a few times, but had never had the chance to see her. Even the last 2 times the couple had entered the palace, the Empress Dowager had said she was ill and refused to see her. And when Wanner entered the palace herself, the Empress Dowager loved her dearly. She held her in her arms and called her darling. The Empress Dowager was clearly distancing herself from Fan Xian. This made Wanner feel vaguely uneasy and confused. Fan Xian laughed coldly in his heart. He knew that the Empress Dowager had guessed something, but he was not afraid. Lin Wanner looked into his eyes and sighed. Today, she told me about Linger entering the palace last time. Husband, I know your official duties are a bit difficult, but you still don't know what kind of person you are. It looks like you are using her, but I'm afraid you are giving yourself an excuse to remember her favor. The things you told me last night are very scary. Second brother, although the second prince looks soft and easygoing right now, his personality is actually very twisted. Since you have no choice but to investigate him, if you still have so many misgivings like you do now, I'm afraid it is not appropriate. Fan Xian looked at his wife's worried face and smiled slightly. He nodded. I also didn't expect that when you were little, you would give the second prince the name Pebble. He looks easygoing, but once he sets his mind on something, he will not change, Lin Wanner said worriedly. Fan Xian had always believed that the way of a husband and wife was based on sincerity. If he was reborn, he would have to be more cautious of the person who slept next to him. That kind of life would be a bit miserable, so he did not hide the fact that he was investigating the second prince from his wife. Hearing Wanner's worry, he comforted her. In reality, it is for the good of the second prince. Looking at the current situation, the court officials seem to be blinded by the emperor's determination to protect the crown prince. If no one pulls the second prince up now, when he truly climbs to the top, it will not be easy for him to come down again. Lin Wanner smiled sweetly and did not continue this topic. She changed the subject. I don't know how your heart was born, but it has a few more openings than other people. Your brain is full of twists and turns. A few more openings than a person? Fan Xian almost blurted it out, but he knew that he was just an actor. When it came to politics, he was very naive. The only thing he could rely on was his own cold-bloodedness and the gentleness on the surface. He bowed deeply to his wife and smiled. How could I be compared to the great strategist Lin? You are a fairy who escaped from the most scheming palace in the world. Lin Wanner spat at him and laughed. Do you really think the palace is so embarrassing? Fan Xian smiled. A wise man once said that in this world, there are only brothels and the palace. It is a world of darkness. It is not a place for people to stay. Hearing this, Lin Wanner was startled. She felt a bit displeased and lowered her head. Only now did Fan Xian remember that his wife also came from the palace. What he said really did not take her feelings into consideration. He smiled and apologized, and the two of them returned to normal. After a moment of silence, Lin Wanner thought about it carefully. Her heart was moved. Although her birth mother was the eldest princess, how many women in this world could receive such respectful treatment from their husbands after marriage? She had never heard of a husband apologizing to his wife. Lin Wanner said warmly, "The palace is indeed not what you think it is. Uncle the Emperor is a wise ruler who does not lust after women. The masters in the palace are all decent on the surface. No one dares to use the methods you talked about in the novels in the past. The Empress Dowager's eyes are watching. If anyone dares to spoil the blood of the Emperor, that ancestor will not tolerate it. Hearing this, Fan Xian's heart jumped. He felt even more at ease. Lin Wanner smiled. The Emperor is very strict within the palace. Fighting for favor? There is no favor to begin with, so how can they fight? The Empress does not care much, so those concubines can only put all their thoughts on the mahjong table. Fighting for favor is good. In reality, it is no different from the houses of other princes. Fan Xian was surprised. He had not thought that the palace would be so harmonious. Didn't that mean that the pile of palace grievances he had read in his previous life were useless? He scratched his head in self-mockery and laughed. No wonder you are so good at mahjong, Wanner. Even that little monster Fan Xia can only tie with you. As soon as she heard about mahjong, Lin Wanner's face shone with a strange light, which scared Fan Xian. He walked up to take a closer look, only to find that the light was hidden like flowing light, but it was contained within. It was like a piece of jade. It was called the light of a master who returned to simplicity. Lin Wanner's eyes wandered, and she glared at her indecent husband. My hands are itching to marry you, but you are so busy every day that I can't see you. But my luck is good. I managed to catch a genius at the mahjong table like my brother-in-law. She gritted her teeth, rolled her sleeves, and rubbed her fists. I don't know where Fan Xia has gone these days. Every day he can't catch anyone at the mahjong table. Playing mahjong with his mother is torturous. Look at how courteous she is, it's like I am her mother-in-law. Fan Xian scratched the bridge of her sharp little nose and jokingly scolded, Who talks like that? He paused and then said, Lady Lu is not your mother-in-law. Don't be too unreasonable in the matter. Lin Wanner was full of hidden bitterness. Am I that kind of person? Her tone changed. In a few days, it will be time to admire the chrysanthemums. According to the rules of the past, the nobles in the palace will all go to Shi Mountain. I don't know how they will arrange for us this year. We must go, but we have to see how we go. I reckon that in a few days, there will be eunuchs from the palace coming to deliver an edict. Don't forget about this. Admire the chrysanthemums? Fan Xian's brows twitched. He knew that in the crisp autumn air, the people of Jingdo all liked to go to the gardens to admire the chrysanthemums. He had not thought that the royal family would also have this hobby. Naturally, he had to go to the Li family's large gathering. However, thinking of what he had done recently in Jingdo, he suddenly wondered if the older generation of foxes were watching his every move like they were admiring the chrysanthemums. Not noticing her husband's sudden silence, Lin Wanner said seriously, I haven't been able to play mahjong lately, and the chrysanthemums haven't bloomed yet. I'm always bored. The book you promised me before marriage, when will you write it for me to read? Fan Xian's head was full of questions. How could he still have the energy to copy Dream of the Red Chamber? He forced a smile and begged for mercy. I say, grandmother, please spare me. Seeing Lin Wanner's stubborn expression of urging him to write, he didn't dare to stay in the room and dawdle. Smoke rose from his butt as he pushed open the door to hide. Fan Xian fled as if he had seen a ghost. He made his way through the wide courtyard until he ran into a few servant girls who were covering their faces and laughing. Only then did he feel that something was wrong. He coughed twice, trying to show the demeanor of a famous person and a famous official. But his body had not even straightened for a moment before he immediately slowed down. He gritted his teeth. Since he was young, he had decided that he wanted to live a beautiful life. Why should he care about how others looked at him? He grunted, hummed a little tune, and hopped into his study. Although his conversation with his wife was casual, he had obtained some useful information. However, Fan Xi's movements these days were indeed a little strange. Fan Xian frowned, faintly worried. Then he thought of the problem with Story of the Stone. Only then did he remember that the Emperor of Northern Qi had sealed off the news. He owed him a favor, and it seemed that he would have to copy a chapter and send it over. However, the fact that he was the author of Story of the Stone could not be hidden for long. He decided not to use the Overwatch Council's secret mail route. After sitting for a short while, before the light outside the room had completely dimmed, Yan Bingyun had arrived as promised. Fan Xian looked at the file he handed over and could not help but rub his temples. Today, he had first gone through the file Mu Tai had handed over and set the tone with Shichanli. Next, he had gone to the old manor to do some work. After returning to comfort his wife, he now had to talk to Sir Yen. In a short day, he had done so many things. It seemed that the so-called cultivation of a powerful official was indeed a very tiring path. I've already arrested the people you wanted me to arrest. I don't know if this will be of any help to your work. Fan Xian did not look at the file. He only asked calmly. A while ago, the whack-a-mole seemed to have not touched upon the bureaucracy of the capital, but in reality, under the cover of a large number of redundant cases, he had carefully approached the secret power of the second prince. He had also tentatively arrested 2 officials, because Yan Bingyun believed that although the 2 officials were of low rank, they were important figures in investigating whether or not there was a relationship between the second prince and the eldest princess. Yan Bingyun sat in a chair, his expression calm. He pointed at the file in front of him. They have been arrested. Fan Xian was shocked. That fast? He was too lazy to look at the file again. The conclusion? He asked directly. Yan Bingyun said coldly, every year, Xinjiang smuggles a large amount of goods to northern Qi and Dongyi. On the surface, the deficit is caused by the crown prince of the Eastern Palace, but in reality, the largest amount is given to the second prince through the Ming family. It is used to bribe the officials in the court and befriend the feudal officials of various places. So your judgment is correct. The second prince is backed by the eldest princess. Fan Xian frowned. The Ming family? The in-laws of the Cui family? Exactly. Such a large amount. How did they get it from the palace treasury to the second prince? Fan Xian asked. Of course, they couldn't go through the capital. They went around Jiangnan. In the middle, a few royal merchants split it up. From bottom to top, they were all controlled by the second prince. Yan Bingyun glanced at him. The process is complicated. It is written in the file. If there is anything you do not understand, you can just read it. It is more complicated to say it. Fan Xian did not pay attention to the doubt in his voice about his ability. He only sank into deep thought. His judgment was correct. He took a deep breath and said, "The man is very handsome." Fan Xian countered with a question. The eldest princess and the second prince did it so secretly, but we easily found out. Do you think the palace doesn't know? How could our director Chen not know? Even if the palace is vigilant, they certainly do not have concrete evidence. Yan Bingyun slowly lowered his eyes. Don't forget, the head of the first bureau, Zhu Gu, was always the eldest princess man. This case, if you were not in charge of the first bureau and the full cooperation of the other departments, it would have been impossible to find out. So, the situation now is that if you really open this case, Jingdo will be in chaos. He spoke calmly, but Fan Xian could hear a glimmer of coldness behind his words. To be able to find out so quickly, other than the terrifying resources of the Overwatch Council, a large part of it was due to Yan Bingyun's extraordinary ability. It was clear that Yan Bingyun did not want the case he was investigating to throw the seemingly peaceful Qin court into chaos. When it came down to it, Yan Bingyun was not loyal to Fan Xian. He was loyal to the Emperor, to the Qin kingdom, and to the Overwatch Council. Fan Xian glanced at him. Do you know what it means to suppress this matter? Yan Bingyun shook his head. I only know that if this matter is opened, your wife will be the one in the most difficult situation. In reality, most of the upper echelons knew that Fan Xian's wife was the eldest princess daughter. It was just that no one had said it. If Fan Xian was determined to expose this matter, without question, no matter how one looked at it, the emperor in the palace would have to make an unusually valiant response. Lin Wanner's situation would inevitably become awkward. Fan Xian's actions after returning to the capital were actually just to make up for his failure in using the paper to force the eldest princess away and ease the conflict in the palace. The result he wanted was to force the emperor, who might have other plans, to strip away the eldest princess' power in the shortest amount of time. I respect my wife. Fan Xian stared at Yan Bingyun with a chill. But I will not slow down my steps because of her difficulties. Yan Bingyun slowly raised his head. There seemed to be some confusion in his eyes. This is something I do not understand. Sir, what exactly do you want to do? 2 reasons. Fan Xian stood up and walked to the window of the study. He looked at the slowly sinking sun. In the corner of the courtyard, a woman was taking care of the branches and leaves of a shrub. The first reason is very simple. The court is currently short of silver. The great river in the south has not been repaired for many years. This year, the dam has failed and hundreds of thousands of people have drowned. Although I have not personally seen it, thinking about it, it is indeed tragic, brother. Where can we find silver for disaster relief? My father has been worrying about this problem these days. The financial situation of the current dynasty is different from that of previous dynasties in history. Long years of military use have used up large amounts of money and grain. Putting aside this, the source is also very strange. A large portion of the national treasury's annual income must come from the palace treasury. The palace treasury is the emperor's treasury. In reality, you and I both know that it is the legacy of the mistress of the Yi family. It is only by relying on the endless silver produced by these industries that the Qing kingdom can be supported. Fan Xian turned his head and narrowed his eyes at Yan Bingyun. The eldest princess is a person who loves to play with power. Over the years, the silver of the palace treasury has gradually been scattered into the hands of officials in exchange for her and him loyalty and power. To put it bluntly, this is using the emperor's silver to poach the emperor's officials. The silver has been spent on internal strife and officials. In this world where silver is needed, where can we find silver? Silver is just silver. How to use it is a big problem. Rather than letting it rot in the officials' residences, it is better to force it out and fill it in the river to scare the ghost. So, I am in a hurry to investigate the Cui family and the second prince. Otherwise, our eldest princess and the second prince, who only seems to like reading, will generously give away all the silver of the Qing kingdom. Fan Xian lowered his head slightly and seemed to feel a little emotional. He smiled bitterly and said, "Of course, after this matter is exposed, the emperor will probably not punish his own sister. But just like last time when she was chased out of the palace, the emperor will be afraid of gossip and carefully investigate the palace treasury. He will also give the second prince a wake-up call. But His Majesty will probably be angry and think that I am meddling in other people's business. He will kick me out of the Overwatch Council and demote me far away." He stretched and wore a pure and innocent smile on his face. "There is no other way. I hope the Emperor will let me return to Danzhou." Yan Bingyun tilted his head slightly. His face was stiff, as if he had never known the commissioner in front of him. He murmured, "But you will take over the palace treasury next year. When that time comes, won't it be right and proper for you to investigate?" Fan Xian smiled and spoke as if he was talking about someone else's business. "The Qing kingdom has no surplus food. The sooner we can stop the outflow of silver from the palace treasury, the more the people in the south can have a few more bowls of porridge to eat. Other things can wait, but if we don't eat, we will starve. Yen Bingyun stared at him, as if trying to see if the person in front of him was the sinister official he had thought he was, or if he was a compassionate, benevolent, and unafraid of criticism. Chapter 271. Don't think I'm a saint. Fan Xian shook his head. In the end, I'm thinking for myself. Taking over the palace treasury next year? That would be cutting off Xinyang's source of income. How could she support the prince? Could she allow such a thing to happen? The accounts of the palace treasury are clean and tidy, but what about the secret deficit? Do you want me to take it and worry until my hair turns white? Her leftovers from the feast. I don't want to hold this broken plate of food. The palace treasury is a mountain of gold, but also a basin of dirty water. The eldest princess has the Empress Dowager's favor, but what about me? As a foreign official, going to take charge of the palace treasury is a painful thing to do. He said in distress, I wonder if the emperor wants me to be the eldest princess's scapegoat? In the future, when the palace treasury's deficit is investigated, I won't be able to explain it even if I had 800 mouths. Yes, I'm not satisfied, so I'm going to take my mother-in-law's foot-washing water and pour it on herself. If Chen Pingping or Fan Jian heard what he said and saw his expression, they would certainly give him a thumbs up and praise him for being so young, but his acting skills were already at the point of perfection. Foreign official? Foreign my ass. But Yen Bingyun did not know the shocking secret behind the scenes. Hearing Fan Xian admit to his own selfishness, he felt even more admiration in the depths of his heart. He felt that this Sir Fan Jr., who he had always disliked, was actually an upright official. He furrowed his brows and suggested, Why didn't you reject the palace's proposal in the beginning? The palace treasury is indeed a hot potato. Fan Xian laughed somewhat self-deprecatingly. Perhaps you won't believe me, but I really do want to do something for the people of the world. Yen Bingyun's appearance was still cold, but the warmth in his heart seemed to have warmed. He stood up and bowed to Fan Xian. He then began to use a steady voice and began to give advice from the perspective of a subordinate. At this time, it is not worth it to touch the palace treasury. Fan Xian looked at him quietly. Yen Bingyun did not seem to feel Fan Xian's aggressive gaze. Because even if this matter is revealed, looking at Sir's recent plans, perhaps he will have the guts to ask Shi Chanli to write an official document and post it on the Supreme Court's wall, letting everyone know how much the eldest princess and the officials in the capital have benefited from the palace treasury. Fan Xian laughed self-deprecatingly. He really did have this plan. In any case, he was bold and had a strong backer, and this backer was not the emperor, but that uncle. It's useless. Yen Bingyun said seriously, at least for this year's victims, it is useless. The silver that has flowed out of the palace treasury cannot be recovered in a short month. Let's not talk about whether the emperor can make up his mind and offend most of the officials. If there are too many officials to be demoted, the court will have problems operating. The disaster relief cannot be delayed. Fan Xian sank into deep thought and asked, Then what do you think? Put this case on hold for the time being. The minister has been in charge of the national treasury for a long time. He must have his own ways. I don't think he will delay the disaster in the south. Yen Bingyun said quietly, The things that Sir has arranged in northern Qi also need some time to prepare. After the winter, the council will coordinate with Wang Qinian in the north and south. First, we will uproot the Cui family and cut off Xinyang's path of distribution. Then, we will take advantage of the commissioner's new control of the palace treasury to investigate the accounts and cases. This is the way to be prudent. Fan Xian frowned. I am just worried that Wang Qinian's time in Shangjing is too short. He cannot completely control the power in the north and uproot the Cui family. Yen Bingyun paused for a moment, then simply replied, I can help. Fan Xian looked at him. His expression did not change, but he was secretly delighted. You are now a famous person in northern Qi. How can you go back north? Yan Bingyun replied, The men under me do not need me to watch over them. I will try to grasp more and more power, and then use this power to do things that I want to do. In this process, I will need the help of many people. Fan Xian looked into his eyes and said in a low voice, I really want to be like when we were in Shangjing. You and I can work well together, of course, not just this time, but also next spring. Yan Bingyun understood what he meant. He did not stay silent for long. He lowered his head, saluted, and left. The young and handsome men of the Overwatch Council were not sloppy people. However, after Sir Yen Jr. expressed sufficient trust in Sir Fan Jr., he still turned his head back and asked in confusion before he stepped out of the study, Commissioner, you have lived in luxury since you were a child. Why do you place so much importance on the common people who suffer in the world? Fan Xian scratched his head and replied, Perhaps it is because I have long since gotten used to doing good deeds. Sir Yen Jr. is very patient. He still hasn't asked how Miss Shen is doing. He looked out the window at the half-cut shrubs under the setting sun. His face was expressionless, but he sighed to himself. The officialdom was indeed treacherous at every step. Even the Fan Manor he lived in had such a skilled spy. Although Fan Xian had officially revealed his identity as the Commissioner of the Overwatch Council to the Ministry of Justice, and the First Bureau's secret agent had tactfully revealed his identity and left, the courtyard was still not quiet. If it weren't for Wu Zhu behind him, he probably wouldn't have noticed the woman planting flowers. Just as he had said, Fan Xian was not a saint, nor was he a good person in the purest sense of the word, and he was certainly not a traitor. The simplest reason for dealing with the eldest princess, as well as the unknown second prince, was because he and Xinyang had long had enmity that could not be solved. And the root of this enmity, the palace treasury, was the thing that Fan Xian would not give up after his rebirth. The palace treasury was the Yi family, and the meaning it carried was something that Fan Xian had no choice but to protect. No matter who tried to stand in his way, Fan Xian would mercilessly kick them aside. But what he had said to Yan Bingyun was not all an act. It was just like what he had said to his sister a long time ago. How should a person live their life? How should Fan Xian live his life? Love himself, love his wife, love his family, love the world, love his own, and love for others. This was not the influence of the Dai television station, but purely from his own heart. Muddle-headed, glory, wealth, bullying men and women, this was a life. Honest, wronged, precarious life, this was a life. Leading troops into battle, killing people like scything flax, and unifying the world was a life. Fan Xian was also an ordinary male animal who coveted wealth, enjoyed power, and loved beautiful women. But the experience of 2 lives had allowed him to accurately grasp what he wanted, so he believed that being free and easy, being cruel when it was time to be cruel, being gentle when it was time to be gentle, being close to more beautiful women, earning more money, and seeing more of the beautiful scenery of this world was the way to live a glorious life. On the premise that his life and material life were guaranteed, he did not mind enjoying his spiritual world. But for the world to be beautiful, it first had to make the people who lived in it smile. So Fan Xian, the poor official, inevitably felt a little tired at the beginning. If he had maintained the clear and murderous state of mind of the youth from Danzhou, perhaps he would have become a lot more free and happy. The palace treasury and the people of the world would not have made him think too much. But in the spring of the 4th year of the Qin calendar, that bit of unnecessary curiosity about his fiancée made him fall into the river of love, into family, and deeper. He could no longer live freely in this world. This fact tells us that as a man, getting married too early is always a very stupid thing to do. That afternoon, Fan Xian, the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, and Yan Bingyun, the alternate head of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, had a conversation in fan manner about the palace treasury, the second prince, and the people of the people. The contents of this conversation were quickly sent through the most secretive channel of the Qing kingdom to the royal study in the royal palace and to Chen Pingping's table. Chen Pingping's reaction was very simple. He immediately wrote an order, temporarily delegating his authority over the entire council to Fan Xian. In other words, before Chen Pingping retracted this order, Fan Xian could legitimately mobilize all the power of the enormous and terrifying Overwatch Council. And in the royal study, the Supreme Emperor of the Qing Kingdom looked at the report on the table and only nodded lightly. In His Majesty's heart, he was very pleased with Fan Xian's actions these past few days. Since the officials and the people of the world all believed the Overwatch Council to be his dog, then this dog must have the courage and ruthlessness to bite people, but it must not bite anyone it met. By making Fan Xian the dog's leash, the Emperor wanted to see just how capable he was. After the conversation with Chen Pingping 9 months ago, although the Emperor did not say anything, he had tacitly agreed to the fact that Fan Xian had taken over the Overwatch Council. In the future, he would have to let the child know his true identity, as the son of the Emperor, but because of his birth, he could never sit on the throne. Presumably, the child would be very satisfied with this arrangement. Of course, His Majesty appreciated this afternoon's conversation between Fan Xian and Yan Bingyun even more. The emotions that naturally flowed through the conversation were very similar to that woman from back then. A trace of a gratified smile flashed across the Emperor's thin face. Although the child's words were somewhat disrespectful toward him, he could guess the loyalty beneath those words. He looked at the eunuch in front of him and smiled. "Hong Xiang, what do you think of this, Fan Xian?" Eunuch Hong bowed slightly. There was not a trace of emotion on his aged face. Too fake. The Emperor furrowed his brows and didn't say anything. He wondered if Fan Xian was putting on an act for him to see. However, he had heard that the fifth prince had always been in the south. No one in the capital should have been able to detect his arrangement. "Your Majesty, how should we handle this?" Eunuch Hong asked, naturally, about the matter between the second prince and the eldest princess. The Emperor coldly shook his head. "The play hasn't even begun. How can it be stopped so soon?" This Emperor of the Kingdom of Qing had always been troubled by the emptiness of the national treasury. Although he had always had his suspicions about Xinjiang, he had never found any concrete evidence. And because of the Empress Dowager's health, the Emperor, who had always been loyal and filial, could not ferociously tear open everything under the curtains. After all, Li Yunrui had done more for the Kingdom of Qing than he had done wrong. After all, the second prince was his own son. It was only now that he truly believed Chen Pingping's words. In some matters, although young people could appear a little rash, they could also display sufficient ability and boldness. Not to mention Fan Xian, it seemed that the Emperor had not paid enough attention to the young official named Yan Bingyun. The serving girls lit the candles and left. The royal study was silent. The Emperor quietly waited for Fan Xian's memorial. If Fan Xian had truly guessed his intentions and was willing to follow his arrangements to be a lonely official, then by tonight at the latest, he should have found out and delivered the information to the Emperor's desk. And if Fan Xian really did as Yan Bingyun wanted and suppressed this matter, the Emperor frowned. Even if Fan Xian was considering things for the stability of the court, as the Emperor, he could not allow such deception. With a creak, the door to the royal study opened. A eunuch walked in carrying 2 boxes of memorials. The Emperor had always been diligent. Reading memorials until late at night had already become a rule in the royal palace. The Emperor's expression did not change, but he was waiting for something in his heart. When he saw the secret memorial box at the very bottom, a warm smile appeared on his lips. He opened the Overwatch Council's special secret memorial box and began to carefully read the first memorial Fan Xian had written since entering officialdom. The secret memorial. After a long time, he put the memorial to the candle and burned it. He gently coughed, picked up the red brush, and wrote 2 words on a piece of white paper. He then sealed it back into the secret memorial box. In his heart, this memorial, which could change the fate of many people, was not a big deal. On the road to the pinnacle of power, the Emperor had already seen through many things. It was different from what many factions, including Fan Xian, secretly guessed. He did not care at all about how his son and sister would make a fuss, because no one could truly understand the Emperor's ambition and confidence. But the Emperor was very satisfied with Fan Xian's performance because he knew that Fan Xian was not standing on the Eastern Palace's side to attack the second prince. So when the Emperor, who was comforted, began to read the memorial at the back, his thin face suddenly showed incomparable anger and disdain. The Imperial Censorate collectively accused Fan Xian, the Commissioner of the Overwatch Council and head of the First Bureau, of corruption, taking bribes, and arrogance. The memorials were like pairs of provocative eyes staring at the Emperor's gloomy face. Chapter 272. In the entire capital, the first person to know that the Imperial Censorate had collectively impeached Fan Xian, a popular figure of the court, was none other than Fan Xian himself. When His Majesty had not seen those memorials, Fan Xian knew that he was already standing at the heart of the storm. Mu Tai sat in the chair opposite Fan Xian and said, "Last night, the Imperial Censor of the left, Lai Mingqing, led the way. Because of the confirmation process, it was only sent here today." The First Bureau of the Overwatch Council was responsible for secretly monitoring the movements of the officials. If the officials of the First Bureau could not immediately find out about such a large movement, Fan Xian was afraid that he would be so angry that he would start a second rectification. He nodded and flicked the paper in his hand. "Are these the charges?" he asked curiously. Mu Tai realized that the commissioner did not seem to care. He could not help but frown. "Sir, you cannot underestimate them. After all," he stopped talking. Fan Xian raised his head and looked at him. There was a hint of mockery in his eyes. "Do you think that I am worthy of these charges?" The memorials of the Imperial Censor and the Imperial Censor clearly stated that in the short month that Fan Xian had been in charge of the First Bureau, he had accepted a large amount of silver from many people. At the same time, he had released a large number of suspects. He had also allowed his subordinates to commit violent acts on the street. The last matter was related to the reputation of the court, while the first 2 were actual charges. The banknotes that Lady Lu had handed over to Fan Xian were all well documented, and the officials who had been arrested by the First Bureau and then released could not be hidden from the world. These charges were enough to make any official step down. Fan Xian rubbed the spot between his eyebrows. He had been busy all day, and now he had encountered such a major event in the middle of the night. He was rather annoyed. The Imperial Censorate of the Qin Court, the Imperial Censorate, has the skin of a duck and the heart of a sheep. When did they become so unafraid of the rich and powerful? Or is it that I do not have enough power? That my status is not high enough? Hearing this, Mu Tai could not help but want to laugh. The Overwatch Council had always looked down on the Imperial Censorate, but he forcibly suppressed his laughter. He thought that the Commissioner's last 2 rhetorical questions were asking a question he already knew the answer to. In Jingdo, Fan Xian Jr.'s power was high and noble, and everyone knew that. This was something that Fan Xian did not understand. Why did the Imperial Censorate's censors have the courage to offend him for no reason? These days, his methods had been gentle, and it seemed that he had not offended these people. Furthermore, these days, he had gradually gained the Emperor's favor. Were these people not afraid of making the Emperor unhappy? Mu Tai looked at his face and knew what he was thinking. He explained, "Sir, this is the usual practice of the Imperial Censorate. They have always acted against the Overwatch Council. The law of Qing gives them this authority, and His Majesty has always suppressed the Overwatch Council's secret methods. So every few days those poor scholars will always find fault with the Overwatch Council, but—" He frowned. "I didn't think they would have the guts to directly target you, sir, and with such heavy crimes." Fan Xian reached his hand into the teacup and dipped it into a few drops of cold tea. He carefully rubbed it between his brows. The glimmer of brightness calmed him slightly. The Imperial Censorate was a very special organization. In the previous dynasty, the Imperial Censorate was the highest monitoring, impeachment, and suggestion organization in the royal court. The senior officers were the left and right Imperial Censors, and below them were the Deputy Imperial Censors and the Deputy Imperial Censors. According to local jurisdiction, there were also Imperial Censors, who patrolled the prefectures and counties. They were responsible for investigating and impeaching officials. In Zhuang Mohan's official commentary, it was written about the Imperial Censorate of the Wei dynasty. The Imperial Censorate is responsible for impeaching the 100 officials, distinguishing between injustice and injustice, supervising the various departments, and acting as the emperor's eyes and ears. Officials who are treacherous, petty, and tyrannical are impeached. Officials who are wretched, corrupt, and corrupt are impeached. Scholars who are not correct in their studies, who write to change the constitution and hope to be employed, impeach. In the event of a pilgrimage or an inspection, the Ministry of Appointments is impeached. The prisoners of the Great Prison are impeached outside the court, along with the Ministry of Justice and Dali. They follow orders from the interior, and follow orders from the outside, each acting according to their orders. The 13 Imperial Censors are in charge of investigating and correcting corrupt officials in the internal and external departments. They are impeached in person, or sealed, and the Imperial Censorate is responsible for the Constitution. The Imperial Censorate of the Qing Kingdom was far from the glory of the previous dynasty. It had removed the Imperial Censors from patrolling the various counties, and the power to investigate cases was transferred to the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court. Most of the power, such as monitoring the various counties and secretly monitoring officials, had been transferred to the Overwatch Council that Chen Pingping had single-handedly established. Now it was only the Emperor's eyes and ears. It had an empty mouth, but no real power. What kind of people were officials? They were men. What did men like most? Other than beautiful women, there was power. So the Imperial Censorate felt a glimmer of envy and hatred towards the Overwatch Council, which had taken away most of their power. Perhaps these scholars still missed the glory of the Imperial Censorate in the distant past, so they relied on their right to speak up to impeach the officials of the Overwatch Council from time to time. But with Chen Pingping's poisonous eyes watching, these Imperial Censors had been quiet for a long time. Why did these Imperial Censors suddenly rise in revolt? Fan Xian pondered this carefully. The Overwatch Council was the most powerful of the Overwatch Council, but that did not mean the Imperial Censorate had lost its influence on the court. Even the eldest princess had been forced out of the palace by Fan Xian's thousands of verbal papers. One could imagine that words were enough to kill an official. Most of the Imperial Censorate's Imperial Censorate came from humble backgrounds and were greatly supported by the scholars. In the past, when an Imperial Censor submitted a petition, it would always be echoed by the scholars. After a round of verbal attacks, the court would always investigate. Even if there were no results in the end, the official covered in filth would never be able to stand upright in court again. Fan Xian laughed coldly. His mind turned, and he knew where the problem was. It seemed that the Overwatch Council's secret investigation of Xinyang and the second prince had already been leaked. He remembered clearly that the former Imperial Censor of the left, who had been ordered by the eldest princess to break his legs in the Ministry of Justice, was a pretty boy raised by the eldest princess. And the great scholar He Zongwei, whom he had been secretly investigating, was also in the imperial censorate. Not long after, the secret memorial sent to the palace received a reply. Fan Xian looked at the box wrapped in a golden silk handkerchief and shook his head. Opening it, there was only a piece of white paper inside. On the white paper there were 2 words, Unji. Fan Xian's surname was Fan, and his given name was Unji. Now, he could naturally guess that this name was probably given to him by the emperor himself. He couldn't help but frown, unsure of what the emperor meant. When he submitted the secret petition, he knew that the emperor would temporarily suppress the matter of the palace treasury deficit. But the sudden accusation from the imperial censorate made him misunderstand. He thought that the emperor wanted him to swallow his anger. I can't, Ng. Fan Xian shook his head and said to Mu Tai, investigate those imperial censors who consider themselves to be honest. Since they have petitioned me to take bribes and bend the law, then I have to reciprocate. It's impolite. Mu Tai was a little surprised. Director Chen once said that when it comes to the imperial censorate's petitions, it's like listening to a dog barking. Ignore it, because the palace does not want the Overwatch Council to investigate the imperial censorate. It would not look good. And in order to open up more avenues of speech, the emperor has never given the Overwatch Council the power to arrest the imperial censors. Fan Xian spat. This time, they're not just barking. They're already opening their mouths to bite me. Who cares about the face of the court? I told you to investigate, and when the problem is found, I won't do it myself. Of course, I'll throw it to the Supreme Court and the Ministry of Justice. Even if the emperor doesn't accept it, what's the use of that wall outside the First Bureau? Mu Tai was very happy. The people of the Overwatch Council had been waiting for this day. They accepted the order and left the manor in high spirits. They went to arrange for spies to investigate the imperial censors for any illegal activities. The next day, Fan Xian played mahjong at home and enjoyed a good day of rain. He didn't take the impeachment of the imperial censors seriously. Wanner and Ruoro, who heard the news from him, were a little worried. Everyone knew the importance of an official's reputation. It wasn't until the news of the imperial censor's impeachment had spread throughout the capital, and the Hall of Governmental Affairs had already copied the memorials and sent them to Fan Manor, that Fan Xian pretended to know about the matter. His face was full of shock and anger, but he still slept soundly that night. Early in the morning on the 3rd day, Fan Xian left the manor. According to the rules, an official who was impeached by the imperial censors had to put down what they were doing and submit a memorial to defend themselves. But he didn't follow the rules. Instead, he went to Xinfeng restaurant and led a family to attack the delicious jietong buns. This matter had already caused a huge uproar in Jingdo. No one knew what kind of method he, the current popular figure of the court, would choose to retaliate. This was because this time, the imperial censors had clearly come prepared in their collective petition. They firmly held onto the accusation of impeachment. Even the officials who had been in and out of Jingdo this month were clearly investigated. But no one expected that Commissioner Fan didn't attack the imperial censors. Instead, he attacked the meat buns. On the 4th day, the continuous rain finally stopped. Fan Xian led a family to the outskirts to admire the chrysanthemums. Before the rest of the world, he used his fingers to get close to the little daisies that had just bloomed. Logically speaking, at this time, the Hall of Governmental Affairs should have brought out the Emperor's edict. To investigate or not to investigate. To ask or not to ask. Regardless of whether it was to wake up Sir Fan Jr., who had risen too quickly this year, or to harshly rebuke the imperial censors who were too meddlesome, the emperor had to have an attitude. During the court discussion, the Minister of Appointments, Yen Hangshu, finally couldn't resist the curiosity in his heart and carefully asked. He didn't know that the emperor only grunted through his nose and didn't respond at all. The scene was stuck in an awkward stalemate. The imperial censors' faces of justice and solemnity gradually turned into awkwardness. They planned to jointly submit a memorial again. They were also prepared to draw in their peers among the civil officials in court. At the same time, they were going to mobilize the students of the Imperial College. Chapter 273. The Emperor of the Qin Kingdom was actually waiting for Fan Xian's self-defense memorial. He had planned on casually fooling around a bit and getting this matter over with. Any emperor in a golden age was actually very good at this kind of smoothing over the mud. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian continued to ignore it and put on an appearance of a clear conscience as he wandered around and threw this question back at him. He thought sinisterly to himself, "Don't you want me to bite someone? As the emperor, you have to protect me. If I have to be disgraced over such a small matter, then in the future, when I really do move against Xinjiang and take care of the eldest princess, won't you throw me to the Empress Dowager to eat?" If he had been a normal favored official or civil official, he would not have been as harsh and angry as Fan Xian. It was said that the emperor's heart was hard to fathom, and the might of heaven was unpredictable. As an official, if he became arrogant because he was favored, who knew when the emperor would remember that he had sat in his carriage and cut him down with a knife? But Fan Xian knew that he was not a normal official, and the emperor did not know that he knew. So, this matter was a bit interesting. He was testing the extent to which the emperor could go for him. On the 7th day after the imperial censors collectively submitted their memorial, Fan Xian sat in a carriage outside the palace gates. When he got off the carriage, the officials of the Qinian unit surrounded him and guarded him in the center. His black and gray clothing, cold expression, and tall and straight figure all made clear his identity. The officials gathered at the palace gates saw this scene and knew that this was the person that the officials often discussed after meals. Not to mention anything else, but when it came to placing spies out in the open to protect him, Fan Xian was the best in the Overwatch Council. Today was the day of the court conference, and the emperor had specially summoned Fan Xian to the palace to listen. All of the officials knew what was going to be discussed today, and they couldn't help but feel excited. A few civil officials who were on good terms with the Fan family came over and exchanged a few words with Fan Xian. Using the cold weather as an excuse, they went back to the side of the palace gates. At this moment, on both sides of the square, there were only 5 or 6 officials wearing crimson robes and Fan Xian's black-robed Overwatch Council officials. The two sides stood facing each other, but their gazes seemed to pierce through each other's ranks and shoot toward the city in the distance. The officials dressed in crimson robes were the censors from the Imperial Censorate who had written to impeach Fan Xian. Fan Xian looked at them coldly. Lowering his voice, he said, "All of you look like pigs, yet you're still upright officials." Deng Ziyu said in a low voice, "The First Bureau has been investigating for a few days, but they really didn't find anything. Sir, most of the Imperial Censorate's Imperial Censorate come from humble backgrounds and value their reputation the most. This is the only thing they can rely on. Even the gatekeeper has to be careful when receiving gift. It is indeed difficult to find anything." Fan Xian furrowed his brows and sighed. If the officials are not greedy, the world is in trouble. Deng Ziyu smiled bitterly, thinking that the commissioners' clever words were a bit absurd. The Imperial Censorate looked at Fan Xian coldly. There was not a trace of fear in their eyes. Fan Xian knew that the other party was not afraid of him. He smiled bitterly. If the officials were not greedy, what use would he be as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council? The other party was an imperial censor. He could not send a few subordinates to assassinate him. If that happened, no matter what the emperor did, he could only chase him back to Danzhou. Fan Xian understood that the rarest thing in this world was upright officials. Furthermore, he believed in the investigative abilities of the First Bureau. The people in front of him must be truly upright officials. But he also understood that the most terrifying thing in this world was upright officials swarming up and becoming your enemy. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but admire his young and beautiful mother-in-law. To be able to use these upright officials who were not greedy or corrupt, she really did have some skill. While Fan Xian was sighing to himself, he did not know that the Imperial Censorate's Imperial Censorate were looking at the commissioner and sighing to themselves. Clearly, Fan Xian's actions over the past month all showed the true nature of the immortal poet he hid behind. He was a corrupt official, and he was also a sprouting of a powerful official with money and power. They had enough evidence, but why did the Emperor still not say anything? They were not worried that the Emperor would heavily punish them for shielding Fan Xian. On one hand, they deeply believed that the Emperor was a wise ruler. On the other hand, what did the Imperial Censor do? He shouldered justice with iron shoulders and admonished with iron bones. Even if he died, so what? They only hoped that the white bones would leave a lingering fragrance. But the Imperial Censorate's Imperial Censorate did not fare well these past few days. First of all, their connections with the court had no effect. No matter which department the official came from, once they heard the purpose of their visit, they remained courteous on the surface, but refused to join them in writing. Second, the public opinion of the common people had not been mobilized. The scholars who had been wantonly criticizing the court in the past, upon hearing that the person they wanted to impeach was Fan Xian, shook their heads in disbelief. And what angered the Imperial Censorate the most was the attitude of the young people in the Imperial College. The Imperial Censor who had gone to the Imperial College to mobilize the students was kicked out in the end. No one believed that the immortal poet, Zhuang Mohan's designated successor, the son of the Minister of Revenue, the idol of a generation of young scholars, and the dream lover of countless girls, would be so immoral as to covet such a small amount of silver. 13,400 liang, just a small amount of silver? Perhaps the Imperial Censorate's Imperial Censorate were used to being poor, so this was the thing they could not understand. At this time, a sudden gust of morning wind blew past, making the officials guarding outside the palace feel refreshed. Immediately after, their expressions changed. They looked at the cloud of rain floating in the morning light and hid inside the palace gate. The imperial guards and eunuchs did not dare let these high-ranking officials get drenched in the rain, so they did not stop them. In autumn, the capital often changed its face, and after the wind came the rain. An autumn rain floated down solemnly. It went from light to dripping, and in the time it took to take a few breaths, the green stone floor in the palace was immediately soaked, revealing a thick black color. At this time, outside the palace gate, only Fan Xian and the Imperial Censorate's Imperial Censorate stood there. The rain poured on them, but they did not react at all. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at them. Suddenly, he said, "Imperial Censor Lai, go hide from the rain." He called out to the Imperial Censor of the left, a third-rank official, Lai Mingqing. Censor Lai looked at him coldly and said, "Master Fan, do you think being drenched in the rain will be enough to wash away your sins?" Imperial Censor Lai cupped his hands. "Today, when I see the Emperor, I will definitely impeach Master Fan." Fan Xian's eyebrows twitched. This Imperial Censor was very cunning, he thought. He smiled and cupped his hands. "Is that so? But I don't know if a member of the royal family really broke the law. Would Master Lai have the same heroic spirit you have today?" The Imperial Censor of the left was so angry that he did not want to speak. He waved his sleeves and walked toward the palace gate. Behind him, the Imperial Censorates knelt in the rain. Playing the game of kneeling at the palace gate? Fan Xian felt that these people were both pitiful and funny. He sighed. "Life is only for fame. I really don't know why the court keeps you people." The kneeling imperial censorates stared back at him angrily. Fan Xian turned a blind eye to them. He lifted the rain hat behind him to cover his head. He smiled. I am black. No matter how I wash, I will always be black. Although you are all red, after being washed by the rain, you have turned black. The rain slid down his Overwatch Council robe. The robe was smooth and did not leak water. The black was still that gloomy black. After the imperial censorates' robes were soaked by the rain, the color gradually darkened, and gradually became closer to black. The imperial censorates looked down at their own clothes. They allowed the rain to hit their faces, but they stubbornly remained silent. After all the important matters of the court had been discussed, the emperor seemed to see imperial censor of the left, Lai Mingqing, and commissioner of the Overwatch Council Fan Xian. His brows furrowed in annoyance. He had the eunuch summon the two of them and coldly said, "Speak in front of the court officials." The imperial censor of the left adjusted his robes and said in a clear voice, "Everything I have said is in the memorial. Please, Your Majesty, quickly investigate this case to cleanse the court and appease the grievances of the common people." The emperor turned his head to look at Fan Xian. "Why have you never submitted your memorial to the Hall of Governmental Affairs?" Fan Xian bowed respectfully. "I did not write a memorial." The emperor angrily rebuked him. "How arrogant! The imperial censor of the imperial censorate is the first to impeach 100 officials like you. Don't think your family has been loyal for generations. Just because you have done a great service to the country and are famous in the world, I can't bear to punish you." Fan Xian knew that the emperor was angry because he had been silent all this time. He was angry because he had thrown the topic to him. He apologized. "I really did not know I had to write a memorial to defend myself. I am guilty." The emperor's expression softened. "Considering that you have just entered officialdom, and Fan Jian is busy with work, and that old thing Chen Pingping will not teach you these things, I will forgive you this time. Today, I summon you to the palace. I want to hear how you will defend yourself and explain yourself to the court officials." Fan Xian's expression showed that he was in a difficult position. A moment later, he hesitantly opened his mouth. "I really do not know how to defend myself." The emperor's expression immediately darkened. "Then you admit to your crimes?" he asked. Fan Xian suddenly raised his head. His expression showed bitterness. "Long live, I do not admit to my crimes. The reason why I do not defend myself is because the imperial censorate's accusations are absurd and without reason. I do not know the truth, and I do not know who is involved in this so-called bribery and perverting the law. I do not know how to defend myself." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.